Chapter 977. North of the western region on the fertile plains. Under the guidance of Sylvie, the sniper team soon arrived at their shooting position. A small forest far away from the First Army. A 5-kilometer shooting range was not safe. Under good weather and with no cover, the devil beasts could still discover the First Army. After all, when a team of thousands of soldiers was moving, even if they were more than 10 kilometers away, they would still be a relatively conspicuous target. Therefore, the advisor department's plan was to intercept them, pause the march, and hide on the spot. On the one hand, they would take advantage of the high mobility of the witches. The Sky Group, composed of Lightning and Maggie, and the Arc Group, with Maggie as the core, to take the initiative to kill the enemies from a safe distance and mislead them. On the other hand, each participant was given a special camouflage uniform called Jungle Camouflage, which was not only dyed with strange colors, but also made of unusual materials. The Sky Group gave the latter a high evaluation. According to the two little girls, once they stopped moving, it was almost impossible to distinguish the wearer's silhouette from the sky, as if they had disappeared into thin air. Now, Andrea was wearing the same uniform, but she did not like it. The straight sleeves and trousers had no sense of design to speak of, and the twisted brownish-green spots were more like graffiti that had been casually smeared on. Not only that, but the material felt as stiff as tree bark. If not for the special lining made by Soroya, the skin would have been worn off. No matter the body shape, they looked the same after wearing it. Andrea did not know where His Majesty found the cloth to make the clothes so rough. Of course, although she had some complaints in her heart, she would not say it out loud. Apart from the reason that nobles should maintain their elegance no matter what happened, Ashes would certainly not let go of the opportunity to laugh at her. What a weak and inexperienced young lady, and the trip to the Kingdom of Dawn had made you return to your original form. Andrea could easily guess a few words, and she could even simulate the tone in her mind. Obviously, she had made a great contribution to the attack on the Kingdom of Dawn, but Ashes was idling around Lady Tilly. The demons are 30 kilometers away from us. We can get ready. Sylvie's voice interrupted her thoughts. Let's go up now. Yes, the arc is rising. The barrier will be lifted in 5 seconds. Everyone, please prepare for impact, Maggie replied. Oh, that's the tone. Lightning clenched her fist. It sounds very professional. You learn fast. Is that so? Thank you. Maggie touched her head shyly. She had probably never received such praise when she was in the church. Andrea, on the other hand, couldn't help but hold her forehead. How was such a blunt way of speaking professional? They were also prepared for the impact. As the ability was dispelled, everyone swayed a little due to the inertia. Then they landed firmly on the ground. Forget it. This level of vibration was not even as good as Ash's roar. Next, it's the flight team's turn. Lightning gave everyone a thumbs up, pulled down her goggles, and jumped up. The runway is clear. All green lights are on. Lightning, let's go. Maggie, follow Ku. Maggie also transformed into a goshawk and followed closely behind. Soon, the two disappeared into the clouds. What's a runway? Is it a special road for running? Amy looked around in confusion. Where's the green light? Maybe it's a new training method. Phyllis, the protector, tilted her head and said, I once heard His Majesty say the same words in the castle. It seems to be a term specially prepared for flight training. But the strange thing is, at that time, besides these two little guys, there were also Wendy and Lady Anna who listened to his lecture. Huh. Can other people also learn to fly? I'm not sure about that. If I can learn, what should I say? Amy touched her chin and said, Amy, magic supplement? That's a novel word. Sharon's eyes lit up. Help me think of one. Hey, don't disturb Miss Sylvie's observation, Phyllis said with a smile. Got it. Looking at this scene, Andrea could not help but sigh. According to the plan, once the operation started, they would be farther and farther away from the main force in the next week, and try to pull the Demons Investigation Center to the northwest. In other words, they would be alone in the enemy's territory. No matter what kind of enemies they encountered, they could only rely on their own strength to avoid or defeat them. The whole sniper team is obviously going to face a difficult battle full of dangers. Why is the atmosphere so lively? Suddenly, Someone patted her on the shoulder. Andrea turned around and saw Iffy giving her an "I know you" look. She could not help but feel a great comfort. That's right, there's no other way. Since long-distance sniping requires a lot of magic power, in addition to the necessary combat personnel, the team also needs to bring many assistant witches to ensure the effectiveness of continuous firing. Idlers like Amy and Sharon are undoubtedly the best choice. Compared to the great nobles who were well-versed in the ways of the world, she still lacked a sense of composure. For example, Countess Spear almost never spoke. Let's get started. Andrea took a deep breath. The demons should be here soon. Wait a minute. Spear suddenly said in a low voice. I'm old and a little seasick. She was suddenly speechless. Fortunately, it did not take much time to assemble the anti-devil beast sniper rifle. To reduce the installation process as much as possible, His Majesty only disassembled the weapon into two parts, the gun body and the frame, which were carried by Ashes and Phyllis respectively. Andrea finished the shooting preparation in the shortest time possible. Compared with the bolt rifle before, this sniper rifle without a scope was easier to operate. After pushing a special bullet as long as a palm into the barrel, she nodded to Chief Steward Camilla Derry. Camilla closed her eyes and reached out her hands to Sylvie and Andrea. All of a sudden, the scene in her field of vision began to fluctuate, and the outline of everything seemed to overlap. Andrea could not tell whether her soul was being pulled out of her body or being squeezed in by another soul. This weird intertwining made her slightly dizzy. However, after repeated training, she was able to control herself to ignore this slight discomfort and focus her attention on something further away. Sylvie instantly sensed her thoughts. Her field of vision zoomed out, or rather, directly changed. The surrounding woods and grass disappeared without a trace, leaving only a sea of white clouds. Chapter 978. Distance: 12 kilometers. What about other directions? Safe. In the state of spiritual resonance, the communication process between the two was simplified. As long as Andrea had a question, she could immediately get the answer. It could even be said that the one answering her was not Sylvie, but herself. After getting rid of the initial discomfort, all that was left was freedom and carefree. She had already fallen in love with this kind of feeling. Whether it was the sight of 1,000 miles in a single glance or the merging of consciousness with Sylvie, it made her perception even broader, as if even the world had come alive. She wondered what it would feel like to resonate with Her Highness Tilly. Flight team communication: this is Lightning. Arc team, can you see me? At this time, Lightning's voice came from the other pair of sigil of listening. Andrea focused her mind and pulled her vision back. Found you. How about this height? It should be no problem. Just find a cloud and hide. Understood. Cool. Throughout the entire sniper battle, Lightning and Maggie would be responsible for the final remedial work. Once they failed to achieve an effective kill, or the number of enemies exceeded their expectations, they would dive down from the top of the enemy's head and complete the final blow at close range. When the little girl dived at full speed, her speed was almost 3 times that of a devil beast. With Maggie's unexpected transformation ability, the success rate was almost 100%. But this trick could only be used once. If there were other demons on the battlefield, they could only choose to retreat. Of course, Andrea did not even consider letting them take action. She had enough confidence in her ability. Every shot was her pride as an archer, and it was also the trump card that defeated Ashes with her own strength. She wanted to let these little girls see what real professionalism was. 6 kilometers. Sylvie's voice sounded again. I'm aiming for it. Andrea closed her eyes and made her vision disappear completely. Then she focused all her attention on the first target. 5 kilometers was not the limit of the range, nor was it the limit of her ability, but her personal limit. In theory, as long as the target was within the killing range of the bullet, she would be able to hit it. But the upper limit of her magic power limited her performance, so she could not really achieve this. If she used up all her magic power in one shot, a witch would also fall into a coma. 5 kilometers could be said to be the best result after repeated tests. With the help of her will, the magic power in her body gushed out and enveloped her whole body. Soon the imaginary guideline appeared and connected to the devil beast, which was unaware of it. It was difficult to connect this silver thread-like line with the trajectory of the bullet. It was too distorted. At first, it looked like an arch bridge, pointing straight to the empty sky. Then, as the distance increased, it became an undulating polyline. That's right, it was a broken line. This was the first time Andrea had seen such a trajectory since she got her hands on the anti-Devil Beast sniper rifle. It was constantly changing its shape. The middle part of the line was almost fluttering in the wind, like a strand of broken spider silk. The only difference was that the end of the trajectory was always fixed on the target. She had asked His Majesty about it, but His Majesty's answer was somewhat unexpected. He said that this ability could not be regarded as aiming, because aiming could not predict the things that had happened but had yet to happen. After the bullet left the chamber, its speed would continue to decrease, and the impact of the external environment would increase. For example, a crosswind could cause the bullet's landing point to deviate by more than 100 meters. Therefore, even the most accurate scope could not guarantee a perfect shot. When the distance was extended to 5 kilometers, even a perfect shot became a luxury. Then what is my ability? She asked at that time. It's coin guessing. It seemed that Roland had been waiting for her to ask this question. Although it was a little mysterious, she did not dislike it. If the external conditions are completely the same, then the result will also be fixed. Think about it, as long as you shoot, the bullet will definitely fall somewhere. Then how can you make it fall on the enemy's head? It's like tossing a coin in the sky, and you can pick the one that stands up in advance. Are you sure? Are you sure? But I can't always get the card I want when I play cards. Ahem, these two things are not the same thing. Anyway, do you want to become stronger? There may be a subject that can greatly enhance your ability. Really? What is it? His Majesty smiled. Probability theory. If conditional probability is to analyze the joint impact of different conditions on the result, then your ability is to turn these conditions into constants or simply erase them. Such an ability can be said to have unlimited potential, as long as you can completely master it. Until now, Andrea still clearly remembered the scene when His Majesty handed her the book with a smile. At that time, she was also quite excited, as if a supreme smooth road was slowly unfolding in front of her. And today was the day to surpass the transcendence. However, this feeling only lasted until the evening. After she opened the theory of probability, Lin Sanjiu was shocked. What? This is not something a normal person can understand at all. Click. At the moment when the silver line blended into the background of the world, Andrea pulled the trigger. The roar that was far louder than a bolt rifle hit her chest like a hammer. The flame flashed, and a huge impact arrived at the same time as the airflow. The butt of the gun retreated uncontrollably, and then hit her shoulder. But the multiple soft cushioning coatings on the butt of the gun helped her to absorb most of the force, and the cushioned gun frame further dispersed the impact to the whole body. Before the dust settled, she was ready for the second shot. Then strange magic power flowed into Andrea's body. Everything went as planned in the drill. Except for the witches who were necessary for the sniper and Maggie, the others could provide magic power for her to complete the shot, including the combat witches who were responsible for protection. How did it go? Did you hit it? Everyone asked with concern. After all, this shot would determine the success or failure of this mission. The bullet will fly for a while, Andrea replied confidently. But it has hit. That's right, just as His Majesty said. She had already chosen the lucky coin that was bound to go up among thousands of coins. Even though Sylvie could not see the bullet, she could still silently tell the life of the bullet. After flying for 4 kilometers, the bullet's altitude was already lower than the flying altitude of the demons. Although its speed was still terrible and lethal, its aim was too far off. At this rate, it would only plunge into the mud. However, a strong wind would change everything. Like a bird riding on the wind, or a tile brushing against the water surface, the bullet flew high again, followed the direction of the wind, bypassed the 2 demons in front, and then drilled into the belly of the devil beast from the side. After the second shot, Andrea did not rush to prepare for the next shot. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the devil beast at the end of the line, her first target. Bang, she said softly. The next moment, the devil beast trembled violently, and a cloud of blood sprayed out from its back. A large mass of internal organs slid out, and its belly deflated at a speed visible to the naked eye. The demon riding it was cut in half, its upper body tossed high into the air, and the mist inside the jar sprayed everywhere. Chapter 979. If the demon flying in front noticed the change behind it, it still had a chance to avoid the Grim Reaper's gaze. Andrea had noticed during the test shooting that if the target was an inanimate object, such as a balloon floating in the wind, there was almost no chance of an accident. However, it was a different case for a sentient life form. A living creature that realized that it might be in danger and changed its course was not within the range of her ability to detect it. As long as she fired the shot, the bullet would definitely land somewhere. Once she pulled the trigger, the corresponding landing point was already determined. If the target moved away from the predetermined point, due to some subjective factor, it would be able to avoid the fatal shot. Previously, from shooting to hitting the target, everything happened in a flash, so she had never missed. However, when the distance expanded to 5 kilometers, the process seemed a little too long. Andrea was not surprised by this situation. After all, her ability was to pick the coin that would inevitably fall up, not to smear glue under the coin. If someone suddenly pulled away from the carpet at the bottom or touched the coin with their fingers, it would still fall down. That was exactly what the flying team was prepared for. Unfortunately, the demon was indifferent. It was not that it was not vigilant enough. Even if it was only a few hundred meters in the air, the howling wind made it difficult to talk, not to mention the devil beasts were flying against the wind. Lightning had repeatedly tested this when she formulated the plan. The final conclusion was that as long as the two parties were more than 10 meters apart, the sound of the bullet piercing through flesh would be completely drowned out by the wind. This was also the reason why Andrea targeted the last demon first. The large caliber bullet drilled into the devil beast's abdomen and completely destroyed its internal organs. At the same time, the oblique bullet ruptured its abdomen, causing its internal organs to leak out, and the devil beast to lose its ability to scream. The demon did not notice the slightest anomaly, and thus missed its only chance to escape. A few seconds later, a bullet fell from the sky and smashed its chest, followed by the spine of the mount. The devil beast in the middle of the team finally realized that something was wrong. However, with its low intelligence, it could not understand what was happening. Instinctively, it turned around and flew toward the tequila. In Andrea's eyes, it was no different from a dead creature. She tossed the third coin that stood upright. In the evening, the Ark once again emerged from the ground. According to the map drawn by the exploration group, the sniper team safely arrived at their resting point, the lower level of a cave that had naturally collapsed. There are actually dried bird beak mushrooms here? Amy exclaimed. I collected them, Koo. Maggie dug out a few glass bottles from under a rock. There are even spices for barbecue. Don't tell me you hid these things in every stronghold. Of course, Lightning said proudly. This is already considered simple. If we stayed in the forest pavilion, the food stored inside could probably support a banquet. Forest pavilion? Sharon asked curiously. Where's that? A giant tree near the impassable mountain range, Koo. Its trunk is as thick as a castle. Maggie gestured. We asked Leaf to build a roof on it, and set up a drying field for dried meat, Koo. I'm afraid His Majesty is the only one who can tolerate you stealing his refined salt and spices. Countess Spear rubbed her forehead. These bottles alone are worth several golden dragon coins. If you were in other territories, the Lord would definitely stew you. The chief butler of Sleeping Island nodded in agreement. I didn't steal it. Maggie protested. I picked up those spices from the ground, Koo. Picked up? Spear looked doubtful. Some of the spices would leak out from the buckets in the kitchen. I just collected them. Besides, we didn't take them for free, Lightning added. In the fjords, any explorer can get a handsome reward for the sea maps they draw. I've drawn many maps for His Majesty. In fact, His Majesty wouldn't blame you even if you emptied the kitchen, Sylvie interrupted weakly. Collecting spices is nothing. I've seen Nightingale go to the kitchen 6 times a week and sweep away all the dried fish with honey sauce made by the chef. And not only the dried fish, but also the ones in His Majesty's study. The atmosphere suddenly became heavy. What in the study? Sylvie came to her senses at this moment. Oh no, nothing. I'm just starving. Let's start a fire and cook. Andrea's timely words dispelled everyone's curiosity. By the way, do you really want to find out Nightingale's secret? Thus, everyone extinguished their doubts in their minds and split up to get busy. Sharon lit the firewood with an electric spark. Amy cut the mushrooms quickly. Phyllis and Ashes carried a wild boar back, and Spear Passy was still seasick. After a while, an alluring aroma spread in the cave. Although there were fewer dishes than at the castle banquet, it was already a rare delicacy for pancakes and dried meat sticks that were commonly eaten in the wild. Especially when Ashes used the little fat under the belly of the wild boar to fry it and sprinkled it on the half-burnt mushroom and meat skewers, everyone couldn't help but drool. In the end, the wild boar was completely eaten, not even its hooves were spared. After filling their stomachs, they quickly fell asleep after a day's work, leaving only the most energetic extraordinaries and the gods' punishment witches to keep watch. I'll keep watch for the first half of the night. Ashes added 2 pieces of firewood to the fire. Princess Tilly said that although you don't have enough sleep, you'll be affected more if you don't get enough rest. If it's serious, you might even lose control of this body, Phyllis admitted frankly. But it's still early, so it's okay to sleep later. Ashes nodded and said no more. She wasn't a talkative person. Even in front of Tilly, she mostly listened and shared. For a moment, only the crackling of the fire and the breathing of the witches could be heard in the cave. They're so close, Phyllis murmured, looking at the sleeping girl beside her. I'm afraid you can't find such close companions in the tequila era. Ashes followed Phyllis's gaze and saw Lightning sprawled on a piece of animal skin, with Maggie curled up on her belly. Maggie's white hair spread out like a silk quilt covering the two of them, looking very warm. She couldn't help but smile. She wasn't like this from the beginning. Before she was accepted by the witches, she lived alone like a pigeon for several years, and almost lost the ability to speak. At that time, even the slightest sound could make her panic, let alone being intimate with others. I just don't know if we'll see such intimacy again in the future. Phyllis lowered her eyelids. I hope this battle of divine will change. Why do you say that? Ashes asked, raising her eyebrows. Although she didn't want to ask too many questions, she couldn't help but ask, won't the common enemy make us more united? Chapter 980. What else? Ashes asked in surprise. Every aspect. That's why we have a longer lifespan, a healthier body, a stronger self-healing ability, and a higher plasticity than mortals, Phyllis said slowly. And our temperament is also one of them. Temperament? What do you mean? If we desire to use magic power to achieve a certain goal, magic power will guide us in that direction, such as wanting to avenge our dead companions, wanting to kill the demons at all costs, and so on. A witch's heart will also become more and more indifferent, or in other words, ruthless. Phyllis looked at the flickering fire and said, for a fighter, this can indeed make him stronger, but it will gradually turn us into another kind of thing. What kind of thing? Inhuman. Ashes could not help but feel nervous. She thought of herself in the past, who was always looking for opportunities to kill the church members, and did not care about anything else. That was indeed the time when she was the most powerful. The surging killing intent in her heart gave her almost infinite power, but apart from that, she had nothing. If she had not happened to meet Princess Tilly, she was afraid that there was no difference between her and a beast. Of course, that's not the case for everyone. It's just a trend. The pressure of war has caused most of the living to have no time to care about anything else. Even mortals without mana would be driven mad by the hopeless, drawn-out war. Compared to them, at least we've turned madness into strength. And that's already pretty good. Phyllis continued, therefore a series of changes in the Union at that time may be difficult for you to understand, but at that time, it was a matter of course. Without an extremely strong determination, the three chiefs could not have become transcendents. I see. Ashes reached out to stir the fire. If the battle of divine will continues, what will the witches eventually become? No one knows the answer. Maybe even their appearance will change, Phyllis said, pretending to be relaxed. After all, outstanding beauty is judged by people's perception. If they are not even human in the end, maybe they will become strange, such as demons. The fire swayed, and silence temporarily enveloped the stone cave. After a while, the god's punishment witch spoke again. May I ask why you decided to fight the demons? Perhaps sensing Ash's hesitation, she took the initiative to say, Our goal is very simple. We want to defeat the demons, win the battle of divine will, and restore the glory of tequila. If it weren't for this belief, the surviving witches wouldn't have survived until today. Do you want to rebuild tequila? Of course, it's the place we've dedicated our lives to. However, it would be more of a symbol than a holy city under the rule of the Union. If His Majesty can defeat the demons, it will prove that his path is more correct than that of the three chiefs. Since the cooperation between witches and mortals can bring about a broader future, we have no reason not to support it. Ashes was silent for a moment before she replied, I just want to protect someone and help her realize her wish. Since she wants to drive the demons out of the land of dawn, I will do it on her behalf. Really? Phyllis shook her head. With all due respect, this is not a good belief. Why? Because the goal is too broad. Phyllis spread out her hands and said, It's easy to lose yourself, especially at the critical moment of a battle of life and death. It's hard to define a person's wish, and more importantly, do you really know what she wants? Of course Ashes suddenly paused in the middle of her sentence. Would Tilly want her to fight the demons on the front line? The answer was obviously no. This was just her own decision. Although it was necessary for Tilly to go to the danger herself in the previous operation with the Phantom instrument, she did not need to participate in this sniper battle. However, she still joined the team at Roland's invitation. There was no doubt that this was the reason why Sleeping Spell won prestige and meritorious deeds. The more important sleeping spell was in Neverwinter, the higher the status of Tilly would naturally be. But was that all? She could not help but look at the witches who had already fallen asleep with tired but calm faces. Her eyes first looked at Sylvie, Maggie, and the others on Sleeping Island, and then slowly moved on to all her companions. Why are you telling me this? Ashes suddenly asked. In any case, she and Phyllis had only occasionally exchanged swordsmanship and improved their fighting skills. They were far from being familiar with each other, so it was a little strange for Phyllis to ask this question. She also had a feeling that Phyllis would not tell everyone about the influence of magic power on one's temperament and the demands of the tequila survivors. Because you're an extraordinary, Phyllis said in a serious tone. You're born to be a genius among the witches with unimaginable potential. In the era of the Union, every combat-type extraordinary was the focus of training. Once they broke through their limits and became extraordinary, they would have the power to kill senior demons head-on. At the same time, they would also become the new leader of the Union. After saying this, she stood up and bowed to Ashes. Maybe I'm not qualified to guide an extraordinary on how to go further, but for any chief witch, a practical goal and a firm will are indispensable. According to the records of the Union, all the transcendents were promoted in battles, and those who couldn't overcome this hurdle all died in the hands of the demons. She paused for a moment. I hope you can be the former. In the last sentence, the god's punishment witches used honorifics. You don't have to do this. Ashes frowned. Just think of it as nostalgia. I haven't seen a transcendent for more than 400 years. Phyllis smiled. Don't worry. I won't use this ancient etiquette in front of everyone. Then I'll go to bed first. See you in 2 hours. Good night. When there was no other sound in the cave, Ashes raised her head and stared at the small piece of night sky above her head. She did not move her eyes away for a long time. After ending the call with the frontline, Roland marked a new route on the map. On the 22nd day since the official implementation of the summit mission, the plan was still very successful. The sniper team had observed an obvious increase in the number of patrolling devil beasts, and the range of the patrolling devil beasts had gradually moved away from the First Army's predetermined route. Apparently, the tequila ruins were more important to the demons, and the vast airspace south of the outpost was gradually becoming a blind spot. Of course, none of the patrols around the outpost had been withdrawn. According to common sense, any enemy that took the initiative to attack the outpost could not escape the fate of being discovered in advance. However, the First Army was not a team of common sense. Chapter 981. 3 more days. Nightingale suddenly said. Yes, 3 more days. Roland nodded. Based on the current marching speed, the First Army would arrive at the predetermined attack position in 3 days. It was a raised hillside with the head of the slope facing the outpost. Not only did it have a wide field of vision, but it was also very suitable for setting up fortifications. Once they gained a firm foothold, it would be difficult for the demons to shake the defense line with guns and cannons. However, in the next few days, the pressure on the sniper team would increase dramatically. The prerequisite for them to ensure their silence was to cut off the enemy's line of sight without anyone noticing. On the vast plains, without the ability to transmit information in real time, it was almost impossible to accurately grasp the position of the attacker. However, as the number of patrols increased, it was possible for the demons to exchange for real-time information with their advantage in numbers. As long as they witnessed the missing person being shot down, their search range would be greatly reduced, and it would be very risky for them to attack again. The best result was that the demons would notice the sniper team, but could not determine their specific position. Then the sniper team would stop in time and turn around to meet up with the First Army. In this way, they could not only hinder the demons' flying troops, but also buy enough time for the main force. However, they had to make their own judgment. Whether it was earlier or later, the attack would be full of uncertainties. You should trust them. Nightingale seemed to have seen through Roland's worries. The tequila witches have a good sense of risk, and the magic arc can avoid most of the demons' pursuit. Even if they encounter a small group of demons, it won't be easy to defeat them. You're right. Roland patted his cheeks. After all, Neverwinter was not strong enough, so they had to take this risk. The First Army's speed was severely limited by their walking speed. If they could be equipped with wheeled vehicles, they could launch a blitzkrieg attack on the Great Plains. Even if the army marched under the nose of the devil beasts, the demons would not be able to stop them. Instead of worrying pointlessly, he should focus on the task at hand. By the way, Vendi should have mastered the basic principles of flying, right? Probably. Nightingale smiled and threw a piece of dried fish into her mouth. Last night, when she was asleep, she was still talking in her sleep, saying that the runway had been cleared and the green lights were all on. That's good. Roland looked out the window. The weather seems pretty good today. Looks like we can proceed to the next step of the test. Oh, don't tell me you're planning to test the real thing. Nightingale's eyes lit up. Why are you interested in it? Who wouldn't be interested? She said excitedly. To be able to soar in the sky without wings is freer than a hot air balloon, and anyone can control it. It sounds almost like a miracle. If you succeed, do you know what the subjects will think of you? I'm afraid that even the gods will not be able to shake your prestige. When she said that, Nightingale's expression was even brighter than when she received a chaos drink. It was as if she was the one who had won the admiration of everyone. Roland could not help but laugh. We're still in the exploration stage. There's still a long way to go before we can achieve the step you said. At least the steam engine could not meet his needs. He needed a more powerful source of power. But it will come true eventually, right? Nightingale walked to the door with her hands clasped behind her back, and looked back with a smile. Yes, Roland replied without hesitation. It will. 1 kilometer to the east of the shallow beach port. The exposed beach had sank into the sea here, leaving only a section of stone ridge that extended continuously to the southeast. It was this long stone ridge that formed the southern outline of the entire kingdom of Grey Castle. For the inland people living in the western region, the border was just a part of the hilly landscape. When they climbed the gently rising soil slope, they could see the vast and boundless swirling sea. But for the merchants on the sea, it was an insurmountable barrier. The average height difference between the sea and the stone ridge was more than 15 meters. It was dangerous to even approach and dock, let alone load and unload goods. Therefore, before the shallow beach was opened, 1/3 of the western region's border was adjacent to the sea, but there was no seaport. It could be said that the overall economic level of the western region was not as good as that of the eastern and southern regions. The main reason was the lack of seaport, in addition to the destruction caused by the months of demons. However, such a terrain had now become an excellent flight testing ground. When Roland and his entourage arrived, the garrison troops stationed in Neverwinter had sealed off the surrounding area of 1 kilometer. At one end of the concrete runway, 3 identical test prototypes were being pushed onto the landing platform by the soldiers. "Oh, is this the new machine you were talking about?" Thunder rubbed his chin and commented, "Just by looking at its appearance, it indeed reminds me of a seabird, but compared to those powerful steam engines, it seems a little weak." As the most reliable overseas allies, the outstanding explorer of the fjords, Thunder, and the businesswoman Marjorie were naturally invited by Roland to watch. Roland was not surprised by the former's comment. He smiled mysteriously and tilted his head to look at Marjorie. "What do you think?" "Your Majesty," Roland said frankly, "to be honest, it's so different from your previous creations that if you hadn't personally invited me, I would have thought that the Society of Wondrous Crafts was using your name to cheat you." "The Society of Wondrous Crafts?" Roland asked curiously. "What kind of organization is that?" "It's a guild established by a group of delusional people who are between craftsmen and explorers," Marjorie explained. "They're not satisfied with the dull life of craftsmen, but they don't dare to plunge into the moody sea, so they focus their energy on all kinds of weird inventions. 2 years ago, someone made something similar, a pair of wooden wings that are said to enable the wearer to fly." "Wooden wings? They're similar to yours but much smaller, about the length and width of a person." "Did he fly?" Vendi could not help but ask. "No." Marjorie shook her head. "He put on the wings and jumped from a high tower. The wings quickly turned over, and he fell like a stone. He also fell to the ground and died." Vendi could not help swallowing. Before that, the man claimed that he had succeeded several times and attracted the attention of several big chambers of commerce. So this scam not only made him a joke, but also made the Society of Wondrous Crafts even more disreputable. Hearing this, Roland could not help but feel a little emotional. Using wood to make wings, it was obvious that the key to flying was to have as much lift as possible, and only using a hard frame could support a large enough surface area. At this step, they basically got rid of the simple imitation of birds, and the embryonic form of fixed wings was born. It could be said that the man could be regarded as a pioneer in the exploration of the sky, at least compared to the artificial wings, flying umbrellas, flying cloaks, and other imaginative ideas that had appeared in history. It was probably not nonsense when he said that he had succeeded several times, but a short distance gliding experiment at a low altitude. However, the wind at high altitudes was much stronger, and the wings lacked an operating surface, so it was expected that he would instantly lose control. It was a pity that the fjords worshipped explorers who could bring living space to the islanders, but it was difficult to get a fair evaluation of those who did not dare to go to sea. "He can't be regarded as a liar," Roland said slowly. "It costs a lot to get rid of the shackles of the earth and embrace the sky. If I didn't have the help of the witches, I'm afraid I would also have to go through this process. If that man has a name, write it down." Marjorie was stunned for a moment. Then she lifted the hem of her skirt and said, "As you wish, Your Majesty." Roland looked at the glider Type 1, which was making the final preparations before the test flight. Compared with the steam train and the steel ship, it was indeed very thin and could not even be called a complete plane. It had no cabin, and its whole body was exposed from head to toe. Except for the long wings, the other parts were not even covered. In order to facilitate escape, the seat was directly installed between the wings, which at first glance looked even simpler than a model. Different from all the previous machines, Roland could be said to be a blank in the field of flying, and he could not build a real aircraft just by knowing the principle. Therefore, the first thing he needed to do was to write a flight manual. These seemingly simple and crude test prototypes already contain the basic control elements needed for an aircraft, although it looked like a newborn featherless chick. Chapter 982. According to Roland's request, the Ministry of Construction built a track leading to the sea on the edge of the stone ridge. The two ends of the track were raised like a crescent moon. When the prototype was lifted into the air, as long as the fastener was released, it would glide under the effect of gravity until it rushed out of the track. The whole acceleration process was like a roller coaster in modern times, but it was far less exciting. Of course, this alone could not guarantee that the wings could get enough lift, so Vendi still needed to create an upper hand. Once the glider jumped out of the stone ridge, it would be more than 15 meters high from the sea, which would provide ample space for adjustment. With the speed of the glider, the pilot and the rescuers would be able to prepare for it, whether it was climbing or falling into the sea. This was also the reason why Roland designed the prototype with 2 seats at the beginning. Now that Lightning and Maggie were fighting in the barbarian land, the responsibility of rescue was naturally handed over to Tilly. The latter readily agreed. "Let's board the plane." Roland estimated that it was almost time, so he turned around and said to the two. Vendi nodded, clenched her fists as if to cheer herself up, and then walked towards the aircraft with Tilly. After boarding the plane, Vendi found that the thing was much bigger than she had imagined. Especially the 2 pairs of flat wings on the top of the head and the feet, which were incomparable to any bird. Even Maggie, who had transformed into a devil beast, was a little short of them. Being blown by the sea breeze, the slender tips of the wings were obviously shaking, which made her feel a little uneasy. She always felt that once she flew, a gust of wind would break her wings. Although Roland had mentioned that this was a normal phenomenon, the strength of the aluminum skeleton was completely capable of handling all kinds of maneuvers at low speed, and the toughness of the skin Soraya had drawn was also far stronger than ordinary leather and cloth, but the 2 wings were somewhat thin, compared to the surface area. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were just pieces of paper. "Sir, when you're ready, just let me know." The soldier's words brought Vendi back to reality. "I understand. The first thing to do is make sure everything is normal." Tilly, who was behind him, comforted him. "Don't be nervous. Even if something goes wrong, I'm here to watch over you." "Thank you." Upon hearing this, Vendi immediately felt relieved. Yes, she was not the only one who had listened to His Majesty's flight theory class. If someone could correct her in time, she would make fewer mistakes. First, the rear elevator is controlled by the main lever. Vendi took a deep breath and pulled an iron rod in front of her seat. A creaking sound came from under her. She knew it was the sound of the wire at the bottom of the rod pulling the tail. Before the prototype was built, she had practiced hundreds of times on the simulator. "The elevator is normal. Next is the rudder," Tilly said. However, the parts on the simulator were much simpler. It consisted of 2 vertical rods, 2 pedals, and several steel cables. Vendi found it hard to believe that these few things could make the glider fly like a bird. After all, it was not much more complicated to operate than a bicycle. If the elevator rod was a rod that could only move forward and backward, then the rudder rod could only move left and right. The cradle had fixed their trajectory, and the bicycle head could at least turn in a circle. The rudder is normal. Finally, the ailerons. According to His Majesty, most planes had 3 sets of wings, 1 in the front and 2 in the back. From the front, the 3 sets formed a symbol of Earth. The vertical one was the rudder, which was similar to the rudder of a ship. If the wind was like water, its deflection could change the direction of the nose of the plane. The first relatively short bar was the elevator, which could also be called the tail. When it was raised, the nose of the plane would be raised, and when it was lowered, the nose would be lowered, just like the rudder of a ship lying down. Both of them were very easy to understand. Vendi could infer their working principles from the chapter of decomposition and synthesis of forces in elementary physics. The last bar represented the ailerons. It was not until she saw them that Vendi understood where the word ailerons came from. They were embedded in the back of the big wings, and their area was less than 1/10 of the size of the big wings. They were connected to the pedals under her feet by the steel cables passing through the skeleton, 1 on each side. Different from the other 2, the ailerons had to be raised and lowered at the same time to be effective. The opposite forces on both sides would cause the plane to deflect or even roll. It was also the most important control part in flight. Vendi had asked His Majesty about this. Since the rudder could cause deflection, why was there a pair of ailerons? His Majesty's explanation was that the three rudder surfaces did not work separately. Every movement required them to be completed together. If only the rudder was swung, it would easily cause the plane to move sideways. When making a sharp turn, the elevator had to be lowered to stabilize the altitude. It was precisely because of this that he needed a detailed set of test data to write the flight manual that would serve as a guide. He needed to know what operations needed to be taken to achieve maneuverability under different postures, or the effect of changes in wind direction on the aircraft, as well as the inadequacies during operations. After obtaining these data, it was possible to build a truly reliable aircraft. The ailerons look fine. Tilly patted her on the shoulder. I'll leave the rest to you. Vendi felt her heart beating fast. She glanced at the king in the distance, turned to the soldiers and said, I'm ready. Open the fastener. Yes, Your Majesty. The soldiers immediately got busy. The runway is cleared and the green light is on, Vendi said in her heart. Although she did not understand the meaning of this password, since His Majesty said it could bring luck, she would do as he said. With a slight vibration, the glider Type 1 was pushed onto the track. Then it began to fall. The wheels made a clattering sound against the track, and the whole plane began to shake. She felt that she was rapidly sliding down the slope, and the sea at the end of the track was getting closer and closer to her. His heart instantly jumped to his throat. What should I do next? She thought in a panic. The track was already halfway up, but there was no sign that the glider was going to fly. Give me wind. Tilly shouted. Yes, give me wind. The glider's speed was not enough to support the weight of two people. She needed to create a stable and gentle wind, to gently lift the huge wings. As soon as this idea came to her mind, her body took action. The magic vortex started to spin, and an invisible airflow appeared out of nowhere, and lightly pressed against the underside of the wings. The harsh sound of friction was immediately reduced, and the weight of the glider Type 1 seemed to have disappeared. Before Vendi could understand the meaning of these changes, the glider had already rushed out of the edge of the stone ridge. A brief upward tilt made her feel a clear sense of weight, as if someone had reached out and pressed her down on the seat. At the same time, her body leaned back, and she could not help but pull down the main lever. The nose of the glider responded to her control, and it rose more obviously. Her field of view also changed. The brown land covered with withered grass and fallen leaves disappeared without a trace, and even the vast whirlpool sea became a supporting role. The blue sky filled most of her field of view, and the dazzling light made her squint slightly. For a moment, Wendy felt like a petrel soaring into the sky, flying against the light. This feeling was so free, and she also understood why His Majesty said that airplanes and hot air balloons were two completely different things. However, only a few seconds later, Vendi found that the sound of wind in her ears had subsided. The nose of the glider was raised high, but it did not continue to climb. It was as if time had stopped. She wanted to increase the wind power, but found that the wind blowing on the main wing not only did not change the situation, but also made the whole fuselage tilt over. You've pulled too much, Tilly exclaimed. Chapter 983. Everyone on the scene witnessed this scene. Before the glider left the track, it had fallen down the stone ridge and disappeared under the horizon. The whole process happened so fast that people didn't even have time to shout out. Roland was even more worried for the two of them. He knew that various accidents would occur during the test flight, so he prepared many prototypes in exchange for experience. However, he didn't expect that the first crash would come so early. In theory, the glider was slow, easy to operate, and had a low load. As long as there was a little wind, it could fly for a long time. It was very easy for a novice. There were only 2 or 3 points that could easily cause the plane to lose control, and Roland had repeatedly emphasized them when he was explaining the reason. Wendy obviously pulled the nose of the plane too high, which caused the plane to lose its speed, which was not high in the first place. However, even at this point, it was not an irreversible situation, because Vendi could artificially create lift. At this time, she only needed to release the wind to the tail and reduce the wind force supporting the body. Then she could change the elevation to the depression and regain the forward speed. However, the strong wind suddenly exerted on the main wing made the whole plane turn over. At this point, they could only abandon the plane. It was not that the glider couldn't turn over, but for the safety of the two people, the seats welded on the plane didn't have any safety belt design. Apart from the armrests on both sides to fix the passengers, it was just an aluminum frame with a cushion and a backrest. There was no other binding force. Therefore, once the plane turned over, the passengers' posture could be imagined. Fortunately, Tilly didn't let them worry for too long. A few seconds later, she appeared at the edge of the stone ridge, holding Vendi's arm. "Are you hurt?" Roland asked with concern. "Don't worry, I'm fine." Tilly smiled and took a light breath. "In order to avoid being hit by the big guy above me, I first flew down for a while, and then climbed back up after dodging it." The ability provided by the Stone of Flight wasn't as demanding as that of lightning. Even if it carried two people, there wouldn't be any obvious delay. However, the consumption of mana would be greatly increased, and it would be difficult to control. Although the fifth princess said it casually, Roland knew that if it were not for her outstanding control, this rescue would not have been so simple. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty." Vendi looked a little depressed. "You spent so much effort to make something, but It's not your fault. No one is born knowing how to fly like the back of their hand. It's not our domain." Roland quickly comforted her. "Compared to making it, the materials used are the most important. These can be recycled afterwards, so it won't cause much loss." Is that so? I can guarantee that His Majesty is telling the truth." Nightingale suddenly appeared and made a face at her friend. Vendi immediately felt relieved. I'll try again." Roland didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was this an alternative use of the lie detection ability? Besides, he always felt that since she became the head of the Witch Union, she had been working too hard. "Don't you want to take a rest first?" "No." "Okay, but remember, safety is the most important. Leave it to me," Tilly said with a smile. "Brother." However, it turned out that flying was not so easy to master. The second test flight lasted less than 3 minutes. This time, Vendi had made great progress. She successfully made the glider jump from the horizon to a height of nearly 50 meters. However, when turning, the wings of the glider appeared to roll excessively. Although it could be seen that Vendi tried to adjust the wind direction to regain balance, she still failed after several large swings. Tilly decisively pulled her away from the seat, and the glider fell crookedly to the ground. Its two wings were deformed to different degrees. Obviously, it could not continue to fly until it was repaired. Compared to the first flight in human history, which was only 3 meters above the ground, this scene was enough to make all the participants famous in history. However, flying was far from enough. Roland needed to turn it into practical equipment as soon as possible in order to deal with the Battle of Divine, that was getting closer. According to this efficiency, he would soon achieve the achievement. What is it like to crash 3 planes in one morning? What's the problem this time? There was a crosswind. Tilly shrugged and said, "At that time, the speed was also a bit low." Vendi nodded in self-reproach. "I didn't control it well. When I panicked, I lost control of my magic power. If I only paid attention to my hands, I wouldn't have fallen." "I see." Roland's heart skipped a beat. This was a problem that he had neglected before. Witches needed to concentrate to use their magic. When they were in a panicked environment, it was difficult for their magic power to be as stable as usual. Once they could not accurately control their magic power, it would not only be of no help to piloting the plane, but also counterproductive. If he wanted to overcome this, he would have to practice more. "How about, let me have a try?" Tilly suddenly said. "You?" He was slightly surprised. "I've also taken the flight theory class. If I operate it, at least I won't be distracted by controlling the wind direction. In this way, Vendi's burden will also be reduced a lot." And Tilly raised the corner of her mouth, her eyes sparkling with eagerness. "I think I can control this big guy." Seeing that Vendi had no objection, Roland thought for a moment and agreed to her request. At the beginning, the reason why he chose the former for the test flight was that the operator was the most familiar with the changes of the wind and the requirements, so that the glider could always be in a state of continuous flight. But now it seemed that it was not as easy as he had imagined to achieve the effect of combining the wind and the engine. In this case, there was no harm in slightly adjusting the plan. Tilly was his nominal sister and the leader of the sleeping spell, so it was undoubtedly one of his responsibilities to make her happy. Anyway, at present, there was only one prototype for them to play with. It was not a bad thing to throw it as a toy, but before the next test flight, he had to make more spare parts. However, when the third glider left the orbit, Roland found that he had underestimated the opponent's ability. At first, it flew steadily toward the horizon and steadily increased in altitude, but when the plane turned back toward the sun, its rhythm gradually became different. It rose with the wind, like a flexible swallow, passing between the blue sky and the sea. Although it was not appropriate to describe a clumsy biplane as a swallow, under Tilly's control, both the turning and the pitch were very natural. In such a nimble flight, Roland actually felt a trace of the beauty of coordination. He realized that the opponent did not make much use of Vendi's wind power. Only when the speed and altitude were both lost, would she adjust her posture and let the wind of magic lift the plane back into the sky. She was using the rudder of the wing to control the plane. It had only been 30 minutes since she boarded the plane. If it was a talent, it was a bit too amazing. It suddenly occurred to Roland that Tilly's ability to use the magic stone was far better than that of ordinary witches. And Agatha had also mentioned that when she used the magic stone, it was like her body suddenly had another part of her body, and it was not easy to control it. Was this the real strength of Tilly as an extraordinary? Her nervous system, which was far beyond that of ordinary people, brought her a strong ability to cooperate and accept. That was why she could master the trick of flying in such a short period of time. Thinking of this, Roland could not help but be full of regret. Unfortunately, he could not make a Gundam. Otherwise, the demons would have to face an unparalleled ACE every day. Chapter 984. So, in the end, Miss Tilly wrote the flight manual? Anna put down the book in her hand and said with a chuckle, "Will Vendi feel depressed?" "I'll definitely be a little depressed, but I don't think it'll be a big problem." Roland moved his body up a little to make himself more comfortable. "Are you so sure? Nightingale just asked me for next month's chaos drinks in advance, and Scroll also applied for 3 ice cream rolls. With the 2 of them accompanying her, maybe she'll recover in one night. I also specially gave her 2 bottles of fruit wine as a form of comfort, so that she won't worry about it when she gets drunk." "Is this wine called drunk or dreaming?" "No, it's called vanilla medium wine." "What? It's really ordinary." This was the most relaxing moment for Roland. After washing off the dust and fatigue of the day, the 2 of them would lean against the soft black velvet pillows and share the trifles of the day that they had experienced. Usually, Anna would also bring along a travel book or miscellany and read it before going to bed. One of his favorite things to do was to turn sideways and admire her soft and bright profile. Since the railway line in the misty forest started construction, this was one of the few times they could face each other. Almost every 3 days, she would take the train to the northwest to deal with the tracks laid by Leaf, and then take the train back in the evening. Even if she didn't have to weld the tracks, she still had a lot of work to do. For example, some of the key components of weapons, and the replacement and improvement of the new machine tools. Cutting and assembling the skeleton of the glider was also inseparable from her. Although the industrial level of the Western region had been greatly developed compared to the time when it was first established, and the basic metal raw materials and production tools had been de-witched, it still could not keep up with the speed of updating Roland's design. Therefore, this leisure was even more precious. But it's not bad for Miss Tilly to write the flight manual. Anna changed the topic back to the test flight. After all, what you ultimately want to make is for everyone to use, so her feelings are closer to those of ordinary people. In addition, in terms of learning ability, her knowledge is no less than mine. She should be more helpful to you than Vendi. Vendi's specialty is indeed not here. Roland nodded. I should have thought of this from the beginning. So have you thought about the machines for the new plane? Of course, he replied confidently. It's what I'm best at. Moreover, with the dream world as a reference, he could complete the prototype in one go. Once the fractionation tower is completed, we can start production. Then the two of them talked a lot about the industrial problems in Neverwinter, from technical details to development plans. And it was not just his one-man show. Anna not only understood his intentions, but also gave her opinions and compliments appropriately. This kind of feeling was really refreshing. Thinking of the terrible ratio of men to women in the Academy of Mechanical Engineering and the seemingly hopeless job prospects, and looking at the girl beside him who constantly fluttered her eyelashes, he suddenly felt that the god of machinery was blessing him. Probably because she had stared at him for a long time. Anna could not help but burst into laughter. "Is my face that beautiful?" Roland did not answer, but directly expressed his thoughts through his actions. He leaned over and gently kissed her ear. "If I knew you were like this, I would have taken action earlier," Anna said with a smile on her face. Was she referring to the time when she intercepted him at the castle gate on the night of the celebration after the end of the first months of demons? "What did you think I was at the beginning?" Roland could not help but ask curiously. "No matter how kind you were still a prince, the rumored pinnacle of nobility. After all, you were different from us." "Haha, sorry to disappoint you." He pretended to be regretful. "I'm just an ordinary person." "No, that's for the best." Anna shook her head and replied with a smile. "Because I'm also an ordinary person." 2 days later, in the barbarian land, the main force of the First Army finally arrived at the preset artillery position, northbound slope, according to the battle plan. However, what made Iron Axe suspicious was that their journey was too smooth. Not only did they not encounter any attacks, but they also did not encounter any aerial harassment. He had originally planned to advance by stepping on the corpses of the enemies, but in the past 6 days, he did not even see a trace of the demons. The only battle they encountered was with a pack of foraging wolves. Other than that, the whole plain was strangely quiet, as if all the monitors were attracted by the sniper team. If that was the case, it would not be a big deal. However, from the feedback he received from the witches, it was not the case. In fact, the demons only increased the frequency of patrols in the first 2 or 3 days. And then they withdrew most of the devil beasts. The patrols at the outpost had not resumed, so it could be said that the demons had given up monitoring the area. After setting up camp, Iron Axe immediately summoned the leaders of the participating troops and the general staff to the central tent. "What do you think of the demons' silence?" "It's indeed a little strange." Agatha, the representative of the Witch Union, pondered for a moment and said, "The only thing that can restrict their movements is the red mist, but Sylvie said that the construction of the outpost hasn't stopped, at least the supply of the red mist hasn't been interrupted." "It's easy to understand if it's the nobles," the Light of Dawn said. "Either there's a problem in the rear, or they don't want to give up their scouting devil beasts." Then he looked at Agatha and asked, "Miss Sylvie, can you see the movements of the Tequila ruins?" "That place is too far away from them." Sylvie shook her head. "The sniper team gave up baiting the enemies a day ago, and is rushing towards us." "How long will it take?" Iron Axe asked. "At least 4 days." Agatha glanced at the map. Although the magic arc is fast, they're taking the opposite route from the First Army. Of course, if only Lightning and Maggie come, they'll arrive tonight. "In fact, we don't have to guess the enemy's intentions," Edith suddenly said. "No matter what they want to do, it's a godsend opportunity for us. We can enter the attack formation without any loss, and the underground supply line is unimpeded. There's no better start than this. Next, we just need to use the Longsong cannons and raise the demon's outpost to the ground." From the perspective of the outcome, this statement was reasonable. Iron Axe thought for a moment and said, "As long as the magic arc doesn't surface, it's basically impossible for the demons to find it, right?" "You can think of it that way," Agatha replied. "Then can Maggie bring Miss Sylvie with her?" "I'll tell her." "Thank you." Iron Axe quickly made a decision. "Battalion Commander Vanner." "Yes." Vanner stepped forward and said. Chapter 985. The Light of Dawn climbed to the top of the slope and gazed at the busy, but orderly position in front of him. His heart was full of thoughts. This was not the first time he had been to the battlefield. At the age of 15, he was already an excellent squire of a knight, following the lord to charge and break through the enemy lines. After he became an adult, he even gained the reputation of the first knight of the western region. War should not be a stranger to him. But here, he felt a completely different atmosphere. Before the battle, the nobles would shout, reward, and eat and drink to raise the morale of the troops. Therefore, the freedmen and mercenaries would often be immersed in a chaotic carnival. Except for the absence of wine, the scene was no different from an open-air market. Every time this happened, the knight would always laugh at his subordinates. They were like idiots who could forget themselves with a few slices of bread and cheese, but they did not know that these things could be exchanged for their lives. At that time, Philinshilt also thought that only the nobles knew how to fight. Without a leader to spur them on, the freedmen were just a pile of loose sand, no matter how many they had. It was not until the Duke of Ryan was defeated by a group of miners in Border Town that he realized the reality was somewhat different from what he had imagined. But at that time he did not continue to pursue the matter because he had realized his desire for revenge. Instead, he focused all his energy on his wife Irene. 2 years later, after a conversation with his father, the Light of Dawn decided to join the General Staff Department. However, he found that the war had completely changed. If the discipline shown by the First Army in the past month had already surprised him, then the professionalism shown by the soldiers at this moment was enough to make most of the nobles feel ashamed. There was no need for any encouragement. Everyone was familiar with their tasks. Several trenches were dug at the bottom of the slope, the topsoil was all packed into cloth bags, and simple low walls were piled in front of the machine gun formation. In the middle of the trenches were interspersed with barbed wire and temporarily processed wooden barricades. To break through it head-on was almost as difficult as breaking through the main city wall. There were also many buffer zones behind the line of defense. Even if the machine gun positions were breached, it did not mean that the battle was over. The Tequila Witches were not only a barrier to protect the artillery battalion, but also a reserve force that could support the front line at any time. The top of the slope was the core of the First Army's attack. 6 longsong cannons were set up high and pointed in the direction of the demon's outpost. The artillerymen were adjusting the shooting parameters and making final preparations for the upcoming attack. The First Army had transformed this place into a qualified battlefield in just 1 day without the need for the commander's instructions. Philin had seen the power of the new firearms during the artillery practice, but that was still an external object. The operator of the weapon ultimately had to be the person. Meanwhile, these soldiers made up of free citizens were what made him sigh in admiration. Even the knight group formed by the great nobles would find it difficult to form such a well-disciplined and well-organized team. Although he had already sensed the changes in the people in Neverwinter, it was nothing compared to the impact of the scene in front of him. Now you know, don't you? A familiar voice suddenly came from behind the Light of Dawn. The answer to the previous question. Philin turned around and nodded to Sir Schilt. Yes, father. When His Majesty announced that he would unify Greycastle in just a few months and march into Hermes and the Kingdom of Dawn at the same time, the advisor department not only did not strongly oppose it, but also formulated a bunch of seemingly unbelievable plans. Because with such weapons and soldiers, no one on the continent was a match for him. Or in other words, the other hostile forces were not even worth mentioning compared to him. It's a pity that His Majesty explicitly forbade nobles to join the combat forces, Philin said with a slight regret. Compared to sitting in the study, I'd rather fight alongside these people. Individual bravery doesn't matter now. The advisor department is the most suitable place for you. Sir laughed. Besides, what if something goes wrong in a battle with unknown enemies like the demons? I'm still waiting to hold a grandson. Didn't Irene's best friend give birth recently? You have to work harder. Father. Philin could not help but put his hand on his forehead. All right, I won't say it. Schilt stroked his beard. The sun is almost at the horizon. Let's go back to the tent. The artillery battalion should be firing soon. I can't stand the noise of that thing. Yes, father. The Light of Dawn took a last look at the position, and then walked down the high ground with his father. It was time for him to go to another battlefield and fulfill his duty. At 5 o'clock in the evening, the bombardment officially began. 6 cannons opened fire according to the pre-adjusted shooting angles, instantly tearing apart the silence of the fertile plains. After more than 400 years, human beings once again set foot on this land and launched an attack on the demons. First, there were 2 rounds of test firing to correct the errors on paper. When Sylvie gave feedback on the hits, the sound of the cannons became uniform. The improved 152mm Longsong cannons were a little closer to their predecessors in history. In order to improve the shooting range, the chamber was expanded, and the shells were loaded in sections. The firing rate was half a beat slower than the original cannons. However, driven by the higher chamber pressure, these cannons were now able to pose a fatal threat to fixed targets 10 kilometers away. The increased range also brought about an increase in weight and greater logistical pressure. In the end, the solution was to disassemble 4 of the cannons and transport them by the tequila worm carriers. No one could see the roars and flames when the warheads hit the ground. This was a brand new war mode. If the soldiers had not been through multiple artillery battles, they would have found it hard to believe that they could destroy the enemy's strongholds and cities with just a few repetitive movements, without facing the enemy in a pressure-free environment. There were 2 main reasons for launching the attack at sunset. First, the observation of the Eye of Magic did not rely on sunlight, and it could also guide the artillerymen to correct the shooting point at night. Second, the devil beasts could not move at night, so the demons could only passively take a beating for the whole night. The Longsong cannons would fire every 2 minutes. Apart from the vague thunders coming from the skyline, the battlefield shrouded in darkness did not seem to have changed much. However, in Sylvie's eyes, the land 10 kilometers away was completely different. The air waves set off by the explosions overturned the ground within the area of attack. More than a dozen Blackstone towers had been blown to pieces. In particular, when the shells penetrated the mist storage towers, the deflagration caused by the shells could instantly turn the black stones into erupting volcanoes. However, she did not find any trace of the demons. Until the next morning, when everyone thought that the enemy had abandoned the outpost, an unforeseen event occurred. A large group of demons suddenly appeared in the north of the First Army's position, 8 kilometers away from the northbound slope. Chapter 986. What the hell is going on? In the central tent, the atmosphere was rather solemn. Commander-in-Chief Ironax stared at the map on the long table, his brows furrowed into a deep furrow. There's neither a red line nor a sign. Did so many demons appear out of thin air? Although the alarm had been sounded and the combat troops of the First Army had taken their positions, confusion and uneasiness still pervaded everyone's mind. After all, this had happened while Sylvie was on guard. If there were no witches, this battle would be pointless. If the demons could suddenly appear from 8 kilometers away, would they appear directly in the camp next time? No one could rest assured if they did not find out the answer to this question. Outside the tent, the Longsong cannon, which had been silent for half a night, once again roared and increased its firing rate to its peak. Now there was no need to save shells. The most important thing was to reduce the demon's strength as soon as possible. Even if they appeared out of thin air, it's impossible, Agatha said firmly. The red mist is a necessity for the demons to survive. This hasn't changed. Otherwise, they would have already swept the world. Now the number of demons is close to 10,000. Without the red line, the demons can kill them if they run over, let alone fight. According to the previous intelligence, the scale of this outpost can support the activities of more than 1,000 demons at most. Ironax pondered for a moment. According to you, there's another supply point nearby, but the Eye of Magic hasn't discovered its existence? I can only think so. No, there's another possibility, Edith interrupted. Since we can make the supply line disappear from the surface, the demons may also think of this. Dig a tunnel from the ruins of Tequila? Agatha shook her head. Not to mention whether they have a worm carrier or not. It's not a small project to build a tunnel for more than 10,000 demons. This doesn't match the time when they first appeared in Tequila. Moreover, with such a big movement, Sylvie must have sensed something unusual. I don't mean from your hometown. Edith leaned forward and pointed at the target marked as an X on the map. What if they just started from the outpost? What do you mean? Ironax asked in a low voice. Don't you think the location where the demons appeared is a little strange? Think about it. If we were a regular army, whether it was the human nobles or the witches' army, what would the situation be like now? Following the Pearl of the Northern Region's question, everyone shifted their attention to the map. Those who were able to enter the central tent were either officers of the general staff, military commanders, or representatives of the Allied forces. None of them were slow. Soon everyone thought of a possibility. Gasps could be heard in the tent. But this commotion was soon covered by the rumbling cannon fire outside the tent. As the earth trembled, everyone in the meeting saw the surprise in each other's eyes. The light of dawn broke the silence after the bombardment subsided. You mean, the outpost is a bait set by the demons? According to the deduction of a conventional army, if they wanted to destroy this outpost, they would have to get close to it and launch a siege. This also meant that they had handed over their escape route to the demons. If the demons appeared at this time, they would form a natural pincer with the Tequila ruins. Under such a pincer attack, the First Army could easily imagine what would happen to them. The 2-kilometer battlefield was just big enough to accommodate both sides. From the map, it looked like a huge pocket. Why are they so sure that we will come? Iron Axe asked. Edith did not answer. Instead, she looked at the ancient witch representative, Zoe. Compared to most people, Zoe's expression did not change much. Her face was always cold. If it's the Union, they will definitely take action. Allowing the demons to build their outposts is tantamount to ignoring the expansion of the bloodline, which is suicidal for the witches. The fall of a city always starts from the inability to stop the enemy's expansion. She paused. But they have never done so. Times have changed. The Pearl of the Northern Region spread out her hands. In this way, it can explain a lot of problems. The demons did not think that the common people could wipe out the Devil Beast team that went to threaten them. Therefore, Neverwinter must be a city of witches. Therefore they set up this trap. If they were lucky, they could even catch all the combat witches who went out of the city. In order to let us enter the ambush circle, the demons not only gave up on attacking us halfway, but also took the initiative to shrink their detection range. They were waiting for the moment when the pocket closed. What do you think of this hypothesis? Even if it's true, how did the demons avoid Miss Sylvie's detection? Sir Schilt expressed his puzzlement. You may not know this, but her ability is not omniscient and omnipotent, Edith replied. If I remember correctly, there is a considerable gap between her vision and the range of her X-ray vision. Coupled with the existence of the devil beasts, she can only observe from a limited distance. Under such circumstances, I'm afraid that the Eye of Magic has overlooked a large area. Hearing this, everyone had vaguely guessed the answer. Of course, I'm not blaming Miss Sylvie. Edith sighed softly. It's just that we rely on her too much. Magic power was always a problem that witches could not ignore. In order to grasp the enemy's movements as much as possible, Sylvie had to be vigilant at all times and carefully use every bit of magic power. Moreover, it consumed a lot of magic power to see through the stratum, even more so from a bird's-eye view of the sky. Therefore, it was obviously impossible to dig 3 feet into the entire fertile plains. According to the principle that the demons could only lurk in the area of the red mist, she should have only scanned the stratum around the outpost. Also limited by the range of vision, the depth of the stratum should not be too deep. Agatha frowned. We can verify this now. She then activated the sigil of listening. Sylvie, can you see the situation below the ground of the army of demons? Underground? Sylvie, who was guiding the bombardment, was slightly stunned. I can try, but the magic power. It's okay. I got it. The voice on the other end of the sigil was silent for a few seconds. Then everyone heard her exclamation. Strange. The vision of the magic eye is blocked. I can't see anything. There's only darkness below. Everyone could not help but fall silent. This result was equivalent to confirming Edith's speculation. It was obviously not a good feeling to be tricked by the enemy. For a moment, only the roar of the cannons could be heard in the tent. Clap, clap, clap. At this moment, Iron Axe suddenly clapped his hands. My lord? The light of dawn said aloud. I see. In this case I can rest assured. He slowly grinned. In the end, who will be the prey will be decided by this tough battle. You're right, Chief Commander, Edith said with a smile. Although they guessed the wrong opponent, the result coincided. I can only say that both sides have good luck. In other words, our luck is better. Isn't facing the enemy head-on on the preset battlefield the battle we wanted? The bombardment in the evening prevented them from taking action immediately. Now, not only have the demons lost their bait, but they also have to face a well-prepared interceptor. No matter how you look at it, it's a good start. The Pearl of the Northern region paused for a moment. In fact, as I said at the beginning, we don't have to care about the enemy's intentions. No matter what they want to do, we just have to kill all who dare to show themselves. This is what the First Army is good at, isn't it? At the same time, the ear-piercing alarm sounded in the camp again, but this time it was much more urgent. Air raid warning. Everyone knew that they were coming. Chapter 987. Then I'll set off, Agatha said seriously. Let's go. A cold smile appeared on Zoe's face. My sisters must have been looking forward to this. Unlike the First Army, the ancient witches' commanders were also powerful warriors. When the demons approached, they had no reason to retreat. Ms. Agatha, Ms. Zoe. Iron Axe suddenly stopped them. Is there anything else? Although it's not my place to say this, I think His Majesty must think so, Iron Axe said solemnly. Please protect yourselves. Your survival will be the biggest blow to the demons. Ha, I won't die so easily before I take back Tequila. Zoe looked back at him and said, Thank you for your kind words, mortal. Don't worry. I know what to do. Agatha smiled and followed him out of the tent. The dark shadows in the sky were very obvious. Compared with the last defense battle in Neverwinter, the demons not only outnumbered them several times, but also flew much faster. In a short while, they approached the front of the battlefield. The anti-aircraft machine gun squad in the front row opened fire one after another, and the dense gunfire soon became a continuous sound, but the effect was not obvious. Only 4 or 5 of the more than 60 devil beasts were shot down, and the rest of the demons continued to climb higher. Disgusting big moths, Zoe said angrily. If they dare to land on the ground, I can tear them apart with my bare hands. In the era of the Union, the most effective way to deal with such monsters was to use combat witches who could fly and extraordinaries who wore stones of flight. This was also one of the reasons why the ancient witches looked down on the mortal army. Without them, a few devil beasts could chase an army away. Why don't they throw their spears? Agatha could not help but frown as she looked at the demons that had flown above the battlefield. But the next moment, the demons' intention was revealed. They lowered their mounts' heads and swooped toward the rear of the defensive line, where the artillery battalion was located. The two looked at each other and ran toward the artillery without hesitation. Fishball was in charge of the center of the formation. Ever since he repelled the demons, he had been promoted to the position of squad leader, due to his outstanding performance. Although it was not Fishball's first encounter with these monsters, he could not help but feel terrified when he saw the horde of devil beasts pouncing on him. Squad leader, are we still not going to fire? Stuttered a teammate who was holding a belt of bullets. They're already within 900 meters of us. The lookout's face was also ashen, and his Adam's apple could not help but tremble. Everyone was afraid, he realized, and even the most daring of men would feel a heartfelt fear in the face of such an inconceivable enemy. It was precisely because of this that he had to appear more composed. Otherwise, before the enemy even made a move, they themselves would collapse first. Thinking of this, Fishball swallowed his saliva and deliberately slowed down his speech. Let's wait for 300 meters before shooting. Although the firearms instructor claimed that the Mark I HMG had a killing range of more than 1,500 meters, and the aiming range was also about 1,000 meters, Fishball's actual combat experience had taught him that unless the devil beasts were flying steadily in a straight line, they would not be able to hit their targets at such a distance. The most effective way to shoot was to disregard the complicated aiming device at the top of the gun, and directly use the concentric rings to trap the enemy. Then he would use his intuition to estimate the distance ahead. If he failed to kill the enemy after emptying a box of bullets, it would undoubtedly have a negative impact on the squad's morale. Fishball preferred to shoot when he was confident. However, this distance also meant that the enemy could counterattack at any time. He could only hope that the new baffle in front of the machine gun was sturdy enough. "They're coming down," screamed the lookout. Now, Fishball pulled the trigger. He could almost see the bullets lining up and flying into the air, tearing apart the huge thing that was charging at it. The devil beast at the front instantly turned into a cloud of red and blue blood mist. At least a dozen bullets from different directions had penetrated its body. The mad demon sitting behind it did not fare any better. Its skull was blown open, and its lower limbs were cut in half. When it fell to the ground, it had almost lost its human form. The death of the enemy elicited cheers from the squad, and it also injected a warm feeling of courage into Fishball's heart. He aimed the muzzle at another devil beast, and a few seconds later, it followed in the footsteps of the first devil beast. Just as Fishball was about to continue, the surroundings suddenly darkened. It was as if a gray curtain had appeared above his head. Even the sunlight was blocked, and he could only see the flickering spots of light through the gaps. When he saw the true face of the curtain, he felt his heart constrict. "It's spear throwing." He used all the strength in his body and roared, "Be careful to dodge." However, there was no way to dodge such a dense spear attack. The only thing they could do was to hide their heads and bodies under the cover of their shields. As for their exposed limbs, they could only resign themselves to fate. Fishball hugged his teammate tightly, ready to be pierced through by the bone spears. However, the expected crashing sound did not come. He only felt a gust of wind sweep over his head, and the sky became bright again. "P-Monitor! Look behind us!" Someone cried out in alarm. Fishball turned around, and his chest began to beat violently. He saw that the cannons were in a mess. The spear throwing had stirred up dust everywhere, and some people were lying on the ground. He did not know if they were dead or alive. He could even hear the wounded moaning and crying for help in the thick dust. The 6 Longsong cannons had also stopped firing for a while. Gulp. Everyone could not help but swallow. "What are you waiting for?" Fishball gritted his teeth and shouted, "Go back to your positions and continue shooting." There were specialists in charge of both rescue and backup. What he needed to do now was to shoot down as many devil beasts as possible before the enemy launched the second wave of spears. Fishball's rebuke woke the soldiers up, and the 2 anti-aircraft machine guns roared again. Apparently, the demons also realized that the inefficient bone spear attack could not completely destroy the enemy's will to fight. Therefore, the devil beasts were divided into 2 groups. One group flew up and waited for the next attack, while the other group landed directly on the ground, intending to use their superior strength to defeat the enemy head-on. A mad demon had just jumped off a devil beast when it encountered a black-haired man. To it, a male human was not worth its time. It drew an iron axe from its waist and swung it at the man. However, the opponent used only one hand to block its slash. The mad demon could not help but widen its eyes. Before it could figure out why, it saw the man pointing a bare iron pipe at it. Then there was a loud noise. "Your Majesty's new weapon is really good." Zoe released her hand and let the demon, with a big hole in its chest, collapse to the ground. If you had this weapon 400 years ago, Tequila might not have fallen, and the 3 chiefs wouldn't have turned against each other just to survive. Chapter 988. Ahem. Vanner got up from the ground. He touched his body and legs nervously, and was relieved to find that they were not missing anything. But the next moment his heart sank again. Many people around the Longsong cannons had been pierced by bone spears, and it was unknown whether they were still breathing or not. Some soldiers whose hands and feet had been pierced were rummaging in the muddy ground, trying to find their broken limbs. His Majesty had trained the squads of the artillery battalion little by little. From the resistance against the Duke of the Western region to the attack on Hermes, they had rarely suffered any losses. Now that so many of them had fallen, Vanner felt extremely sad. But Vanner also knew that it was not the time to be sad. Miss Nana, the angel of the First Army, was in the camp hospital. As long as the wounded were sent there, Miss Nana could bring them back to life even if they were only breathing. Is anyone here? Vanner crawled on all fours to a seriously wounded soldier whose stomach had been pierced. Somebody help me. Sir, I'm here. 2 soldiers answered and ran over in the dust. Send him to the hospital. Vanner stuffed the bleeding intestines and minced meat back into the soldier's stomach. Don't leave anything behind. Sir. The soldier grimaced in pain. Cut the crap. If you have the strength, save it to kill the demons. Vanner patted the soldier's cheek. Go and come back quickly. I'm waiting for someone to fire the cannons. Do you understand? After the wounded soldier was sent away, he ran to another medic and asked, Did you come from the camp? The medic glanced at the badge on his shoulder, raised his hand and saluted. Yes. What can I do for you? Go on with your work. Saving lives is more important. Vanner waved his hand. What's the situation at the front? After the artillery position was attacked, the nearly 500-meter-wide front was filled with smoke and dust. Except for the artillery closest to him, he had no idea about the situation of the other squads. He could only faintly see many figures running and hear the roar of guns from time to time. However, even the first aid squad had come in, but there was no substitute gunner, which was really strange. The devils have already attacked. They're coming from the sky. The medic's hand was bandaged and his voice was a little hurried. I just came from the central camp and saw with my own eyes those winged monsters land on the ground and then fight with the heavy armor team. The demon landed on the ground after throwing the spear? In other words, the current chaos was caused by the enemy's invasion from the rear. The substitutes could not approach the Longsong cannons for the time being, and the ones who came to the rescue were the reserves stationed in the central area. The front line was still intact. After realizing this, Vanner immediately understood where his responsibility lay. He had to get the Longsong cannons working again. The enemy wanted to stop them from bombarding the approaching devil horde, so he would not let them get what they wanted easily. As long as the front lines were not breached, this number of enemies would be eliminated by the heavy armor team sooner or later. Although he did not know where His Majesty found such a group of monstrous warriors who could carry a load of equipment as heavy as field artillery without panting, he was sure that these elite warriors would not be at a disadvantage even if they were to face the ferocious demons. I'll leave the wounded to you. Vanner bent his body and trotted to the scattered ammunition boxes on the ground. He used all his strength to pick up a bullet, staggered back to the barrel, and pushed it into the chamber. Then he loaded 2 barrels of ammunition. What originally needed 2 people to do was done by only 1 person. He felt a little out of breath after only 1 loading. After taking a deep breath with his sleeve covering his mouth, he began to adjust the firing angle according to the advancing speed of the enemies. At this moment, the medic screamed at him. Sir, watch out behind you. Vanner felt his blood freeze in an instant. He did not even have time to look back and subconsciously rolled on the ground. This action saved his life. With a clang, an axe swept over his head and hit the bolt of the cannon, bursting out a series of sparks. He raised his head and immediately met the eyes of a mad demon. Roga. The mad demon pulled up the axe and roared as it walked toward him. I'm finished, Vanner thought. Although he had a saber at his waist, he could not pull it out because he was lying on the ground. Even if he had the handle of the saber in his hand, how could he block the next attack? These guys were monsters whose strength and speed were far beyond that of ordinary human beings. Seeing that the opponent was about to strike with the axe, Vanner could not help but stretch out his hand in front of him. Crack! An ice wall suddenly rose up between the two of them, and the axe landed on one end of the wall, causing ice crystals to splatter everywhere. Am I saved? He turned his head in shock and saw a blue-haired witch making a grabbing gesture with one hand and looking at the demon calmly. Come behind me. Vanner clenched his teeth. Even though his legs were too weak to stand up, he still scrambled to the witch's side. Crack, crack. Even though he could not understand the demon's language, he could feel the strong anger and killing intent of the enemy. The demon rushed out from behind the ice wall, squatted down, and its right arm holding the axe swelled violently. The witch did not retreat but moved forward. Ice spread under her feet, like a god in charge of the harsh winter. When the demon waved its arm, an icicle rushed out of the ground and knocked the axe away. At the same time, its arm was also bent into a strange shape. Half of the grayish-white bone pierced the surface of the skin, exposing a few strands of muscle. It was a horrible sight. Before the demon could scream, the ice crystals, which had already reached its ankles, climbed up at a speed visible to the naked eye. A few seconds later, the demon was frozen into an ice sculpture. Thank you. Vanner finally heaved a sigh of relief. It's not over yet. The second wave of spears is coming. The witch looked at the dusty sky and said, Miss Molly. He suddenly remembered that the demon's spear attacks had a time interval. Since the mad demon could make its arm swell, it meant that the sky had become dangerous again. But who was this Miss Molly that his savior had mentioned? Was it really okay not to hide now? Leave it to me. Just when he was puzzled, a slightly childish voice came from afar. Then Vanner saw an incredible scene. A translucent blue sphere suddenly appeared above his head and expanded like an inflatable balloon. Soon, it covered an area of nearly 10 meters around him. At the same time, the tentacles on both sides of the sphere swayed left and right, dragging the lightly wounded who had not been sent away into the sphere. At the same time, the enemy's attack came as scheduled. 5 or 6 bone spears shot down like lightning and pierced straight into the sphere. Vanner could clearly see the ripples created by the spear tips, as if they had pierced into sticky water. The surging ripples overlapped and made the sphere tremble, as if it would break at any time. But in the end, the bone spears stopped a few meters above the ground. Well done. The blue-haired witch put away the ice in her hand and looked at Vanner. The danger here has been temporarily eliminated. You can retreat with your men. No way. Vanner clenched his teeth and struggled to get up from the ground. I haven't made these damn guys suffer enough. Now he only needed to complete the last step. Vanner limped up to the Longsong cannon, grabbed the match and jerked it back. Chapter 989. As the mad demons and devil beasts that landed on the ground were killed one by one, the chaotic situation was gradually brought under control. Agatha walked around the artillery position and saw broken corpses of giant beasts everywhere. She had to admit that the gods' punishment witches were unparalleled in close combat, especially after they were equipped with the new firearms specially made by His Majesty. Without their support, the Witch Union would have had to deal with more than 30 devil beasts alone, let alone defend against the mad demon's pincer attack. However, they seemed to prefer the ancient way of revenge rather than using large-caliber shotguns to blast their enemies to pieces. Agatha had seen more than one ancient witch put away her firearms after her enemies had lost the ability to fight back. Instead, she used knives, swords, or even fists to deal the final blow, as if bathing in the flesh and blood of the demons could comfort them. It seemed that 400 years of waiting had indeed changed a lot of things. The demons probably could not understand why a group of male humans could defeat them, and why they were superior in both strength and speed. This unknown would undoubtedly bring fear. Hence, when the last 2 mad demons appeared, they practically gave up on fighting back, and in the end, they were controlled by Breeze, who seized the opportunity to attack them. He even threw a spear at one of his kind who tried to help him. Now that the backup artillery had entered the position, and the 4 cannons that had been overturned by the devil beasts in the melee had been set up again, they would soon join in the attack. As for the Longsong cannon that had recovered the fastest and was still firing, every shot it fired became an inspiring bugle call. How many enemies are left? Agatha asked Zoe after they regrouped. 16, if they don't have new reinforcements. Zoe looked at the sky. We've lost nearly 70% of the flying devil beasts. No matter what their purpose is, they've already failed. They still haven't retreated, so they must be preparing for the final attack. The final attack? Agatha could not help but frown. In order to avoid the machine gun fire, the remaining demons had all flown higher, even beyond the range of the spears. If they wanted to approach the artillery position again, it would undoubtedly be much more risky. More importantly, everyone was fully prepared. Even if they had to face a wave of spears, they would be able to minimize their losses. Since failure was a foregone conclusion, no matter how one looked at it, retreating was the most logical choice. You used to be a member of the Quest Society and rarely participated in battles, so you may not know much about their habits, Zoe explained calmly. Adult devil beasts that can fly freely are precious even to the demons. There must be a superior commander among the mad demons, since so many of them were dispatched at once. To these devils, their mission is always their top priority. If they can't achieve their goal, most of them would rather die in battle than retreat. If that's the case, why didn't it charge down from the start? Yifeng could not help but ask. Because it hasn't found a suitable opponent, Zoe revealed a strange smile. If there was an extraordinary among us, it would have come down long ago. Why? Maybe it's their nature. She looked at the sky again. They're bloodthirsty and brutal. Even though they're becoming more and more like humans, they can't change this. If it weren't for this characteristic, Lady Natalia and the Queen of Starfall City wouldn't have been able to find opportunities to fight with senior magic slayers in the army of demons and eventually become transcendents. In other words, the enemies underestimated us and didn't join the attack immediately. Later, they refused to retreat because of their responsibility? Regardless of whether this deduction was correct or not, the fact that Roland could tell the promotion experience of 2 of the 3 chiefs so straightforwardly showed that she was not an ordinary person. Agatha could not help but ask, "In the Union era, who exactly were you? Didn't Lady Pasha tell you?" Zoe smiled. "I was one of Lady Natalia's shadow guards, and also the Red Lotus of the Blessed Army." The Ice Witch realized that she had heard of this title before. If she was the youngest promoted witch in Tequila and was recognized as a genius researcher, then Red Lotus was a new star in the battle world, a power-type extraordinary, and an outstanding warrior who was the most likely to succeed Natalia. Unfortunately, the Union did not survive until Red Lotus broke through. If she remembered correctly, Red Lotus should be about the same age as herself. But now, she could not see any trace of her past in Zoe. It was as if time had molded her into a different person. "They're coming." Just then, Zoe's words interrupted Agatha's thoughts. "Protect those fragile mortals, and leave the enemies to us." As if to confirm her words, Sylvie's exclamation came from the sigil of listening. "Oh my God, what's that? Agatha, be careful. There's a reaction of multiple magic sources among the enemies." In theory, a witch could only have one magic cyclone, but the demons could exert their power by embedding magic stones, so it was possible for them to have multiple cyclones. The Union referred to such enemies as the senior demons. Their strength might vary, but they were all extremely difficult opponents to deal with without exception. "Will it be okay?" Breeze asked worriedly. Don't worry," Zoe said slowly. "The Queen of Starfall City may have chosen the wrong path, but she was right about one thing. The gods' punishment witches were born to fight against the senior demons." As she spoke, a black shadow darted out of the clouds and headed straight for the cannons. The other hovering mad demons also responded by driving their mounts to dive down. Although the direct descent from above greatly limited the firing angle of the machine guns in the camp, the anti-air squads stationed outside the perimeter were able to pour bullets into the enemy's path. Even if the demons used a serpentine maneuver to evade, they still managed to shoot down a few of them in the process of approaching. This time, the enemy's target was the anti-aircraft machine guns next to the Longsong cannons. Without a doubt, everything they did was to let the black shadow reach the core. While assisting the soldiers to defend against the bone spears, Agatha was surprised to find that the meteorite-like object was actually a huge devil beast. It was even bigger than Maggie, and its wings and abdomen were covered with black armor that looked like pieces of dull crystals. Not only that, but its head and horns were also sharper. At first glance, it looked like the legendary dragon. When it landed, The whole ground trembled and the dust was blown up by the strong wind, making it difficult for people to open their eyes. Then the devil beast opened its bloody mouth and made a series of rumbling sounds. Chapter 990. Although there was a sudden ominous magic reaction at the rear of the camp, Sylvie could not care less. Apart from maintaining the minimum surveillance and issuing a hasty warning, she focused all her attention on the army of demons a few kilometers away in the north. There were things that she had never seen before. She could not even classify them as inanimate objects or living beings. Just by looking at them, she could tell that they were evil. The size of a two-story building was about the same as that of a reptile, similar to a crab or a spider, but its limbs and torso were made of dark stones. They didn't seem to be agile at all. Every step they took was methodical, and they didn't care about the cannonballs that rained down on them from time to time. Even when their companions were blasted into smithereens by the cannonballs, these monsters didn't stop at all. They were somewhat similar to the machines invented by His Majesty Roland, but they were not real machines. Through the thick shell, Lin Sanjiu could clearly see a pile of wriggling flesh. The radiance of magic flowed through it, and poured into every part of the shell, through thousands of veins. If she had to describe it, Sylvie could only think of the word parasitic. Living creatures were parasitic in the stones and metals. Compared to the crawling monsters, the dreadful siege beasts did not seem so scary. Fortunately, they were not indestructible. The first army could still cause damage to them. They did not even need to hit them directly. As long as they fell near the crawling monsters, they could destroy their lower limbs and immobilize them. Unfortunately, compared to the tens of thousands of demons, the crawling monsters were too small a target. Since the appearance of these monsters, Sylvie had been directing the artillery squad to fire at them. However, the shells that traveled several kilometers could not hit their target. Until the moment when the devil beasts broke into the artillery position and launched an attack, only one of the 5 crawling monsters was injured and stopped. While the rear was in a chaotic battle, Lin Sanjiu could not help but worry for the front line. Perhaps the artillery squad did not realize how much of a threat they posed to the demons. In fact, among all the people who participated in this battle, she was the only one who witnessed the shocking destruction caused by the Longsong cannons. Especially when the demons appeared on the surface, their dense formation almost turned the battlefield 8 kilometers away into a slaughterhouse. Every time a shell fell into the army, it would set off a column of earth that was nearly 10 meters high, and at the same time, it would bring along a large number of broken limbs. The stones that were blown away could penetrate the enemy's hide and bone armor, not to mention the scattered shrapnel. The burly bodies of the mad demons became the best targets for the flying arrows. Usually, after one bombardment, dozens of demons would collapse around the crater, their magic blood seeping into the ground like a blooming blue flower. Only 3 rounds of firing were enough to shake the enemy formation. And this was even when the shells occasionally missed their target. Although the demons had dispersed their formation, the Grim Reaper still put them under great pressure, which could be seen from their running speed. If not for the interference of the devil beasts, the enemy would have been completely defeated. Although the artillery squad had recovered some of the cannons, their accuracy and firing rate were not as good as before. The demons took the opportunity to advance quickly. When more magic sources appeared behind the position, the enemy army was only 2 kilometers away from the defensive line. At this moment, the frontline soldiers should be able to see the demons surging from the horizon with their naked eyes. According to the plan, Sylvie sent a warning to Xavi, who was on the front line. The enemies have entered the range of the mortar. Understood. I'll inform the commander right away. The other party replied quickly. By the way, how's the situation at the rear? Haven't they dealt with those flying devils yet? There was an accident, Sylvie said hesitantly. But it should be fine. If Andrea was here, the battle would have ended long ago, right? Maybe. In order to not worry Xavi too much, she decided to hide what she saw. As she spoke, she suddenly noticed that the 4 crawling monsters in the army of demons had stopped advancing. They spread their long legs and crouched down one by one. What are they going to do? Sylvie soon saw that the carapace on the back of the monster opened up to reveal a black crystal-like cylinder. It was about the thickness of a person, and its surface was covered with mucus, as if it grew out of its flesh. Like the crawling monsters themselves, the long cylinder was also full of blood vessels and meridians, which expanded and contracted with the flow of magic power. The next moment, the magic vortex in the monster's body spun rapidly and burst into a dazzling light. In an instant, the black stone cylinder seemed to be pushed out by a tremendous force. It flew over the heads of the demons and headed straight for the northbound slope. It was like a powerful crossbow that had been magnified 100 times. At this moment, the first army's mortars roared. More than 100 shells soared into the sky and drew a high parabola. Then, under the influence of gravity, they fell toward the charging demons. For a moment, the shells and the stone cylinder crossed each other, as if representing the power that the two races had mastered after 400 years had once again collided. "Shavi, activate the shield," Sylvie shouted with all her might. As soon as she finished speaking, the thick stone cylinder flew above the defensive line. Then, with a flash of magic light, the whole cylinder exploded. The crystal burst into long needles, mixed with blue blood, which shot toward the soldiers who were waiting for the enemy. At the same time, the artillery position fell into a dead silence. Agatha and the others had taken away the artillery soldiers near the giant beast. Meanwhile, the anti-aircraft machine gun squad was fighting the last few devil beasts. There were only a dozen God's punishment witches and the senior demon, who was hidden under the armor, left on the battlefield. The senior demon glanced at them coldly and suddenly roared to the sky. His voice even overshadowed the hissing of the machine guns in the distance. Everyone could feel the anger in his roar. Then he stretched out his right hand and clenched it. A ray of light leaped out of his palm, and instantly turned into a long sword. Then, he raised the sword and slashed at the long-song cannon. With a terrifying tearing sound, the steel cannon barrel was split in half. The fracture showed a bright red color as if it had been burned by high temperature. The ice witch could not help but hold her breath. That was obviously a weapon made of magic. However, Zoe was unmoved. "Why? Are you not satisfied with your opponent? You came here with the intention to fight to the death, only to find that you're facing a group of mortals?" She raised the corner of her mouth and looked relaxed. There was a hint of mockery in her tone, but there seemed to be a fire burning in her eyes. "Your biggest mistake was to come down by yourself. If you had stayed in the sky, you might have been able to survive for a while. Now you can have a good taste of 400 years of anger. As for that little bit of anger of yours, it's not even worth mentioning." Although they could not communicate, their attitudes were clear. The demon roared and threw the magic sword in his hand. The sword shot toward Zoe like a dazzling thunder. The two God's punishment witches next to Zoe stood close to her, and simultaneously launched the field of God's punishment. A strange force suddenly distorted the space around the witches. Thunder seemed to have hit the void. The dazzling light was swallowed by the bottomless darkness and disappeared in an instant. The senior demon could not help but be stunned. The other God's punishment witches raised the large-caliber shotguns in their hands. In the blink of an eye, a storm of gunshots swept through the entire artillery position. The demon burst out a blue light shield, but it quickly dimmed in less than a breath's time. Even the black armor on its body was unable to withstand this round of bombardment. Chapter 991. The giant devil beast seemed to be aware of the danger. Seeing that its master had fallen, it flapped its wings and tried to escape, but it did not expect that the situation was different from when it came. Less than 10% of its companions were still alive, and it did not have the power to fall from the sky. Its huge body slowed down the speed of its ascent. If the devil beast stayed on the ground, the machine gun squad would not dare to open fire for fear of accidentally injuring others. But after it rose into the air, this concern was completely gone. For a moment, more than half of the anti-aircraft machine guns in the camp were aimed at the giant monster. The dense barrage of bullets from all directions swallowed the devil beast whole. Sparks could still be seen on the parts of the devil beast that were covered in armor, but the exposed parts of its body were soon shredded. This time, it did not even have the chance to cry out before it fell back to the ground. Stinking blood flowed out of the bullet holes like a beehive, and quickly gathered into a shallow puddle under its body. Agatha could not help but let out a long sigh. It seemed that Zoe was right. The gods' punishment witches were indeed a powerful trump card against the senior demons. It was no wonder that many high-level officials of the Union sided with the Queen of Starfall City. The gods' punishment witches could block magic power at any time, and bring the enemies with different magic stones to the same level. They were not weaker than the extraordinaries. This not only fundamentally solved the problem of the unstable power of the witches, but also gave them an unprecedented advantage over the enemies in terms of numbers. For the Union, which was constantly losing ground, this was undoubtedly a ray of hope in their despair. According to Lady Alice's original plan, as long as half of the non-combat witches participated in the transformation, it meant that thousands of non-combat witches would become the top combat force. The combat witches would deal with the demon army, the gods' punishment witches would kill the senior demons, and the most difficult enemies would be left to the transcendents. This was the battle that the Empire would go all out in. These gods' punishment witches were supposed to be the trump card in the final battle against the demons, so it was reasonable that they could kill the senior demons so quickly. In other words, if it took a lot of effort for a dozen of them to deal with a senior demon, the Queen of Starfall City would not have bet on this plan. However, it was too late. Agatha looked at Zoe, who had a satisfied and joyful smile on her face, and couldn't help but sigh in her heart. If the Union had carried out this plan at the beginning of its establishment, the outcome of the Second Battle of Divine Will might have been different. At that time, although the humans had been defeated in the Land of Dawn, there were still thousands of towns on the fertile plains with a population of nearly 10 million. On this basis, the Union could build a powerful army that was not inferior to the demons. After the defeat of the Battle of Divine Will, the Queen of Starfall City was left with less than 1 million barbarians and a small piece of land. When she made this decision, she was probably just trying her best. "Aren't you going to kill it?" Agatha walked to Zoe's side. The fatally wounded senior demon was still alive. These terrifying enemies were even more tenacious than transcendents in terms of vitality. Even without the observation of the stone of measuring, Agatha knew that the remaining magic power of the senior demon was crazily flowing through its body, trying to repair its broken body. Of course, this did not mean that the senior demon could survive after being seriously wounded. There was a limit to its self-healing ability. Even if it was left alone, it would still die due to the consumption of its magic power. Not to mention the red mist, which would be used up very quickly. Perhaps Zoe was more willing to enjoy the senior demon's pain than to kill it. "I want to keep it alive first." However, the latter's answer surprised Agatha. "This time there are many demons, so we should be able to seize a lot of mist storage tanks. If we treat its wounds and replenish it with some red mist, it should be able to survive for a few more days." "What do you want to do?" The Ice Witch frowned. "Don't worry. Although I personally want to torture it for eternity, that's only if it doesn't affect the overall situation." Zoe said seriously, "If I remember correctly, there's a witch in another team who can connect with the mind." "You want her to connect with the senior demon?" Agatha asked in surprise. Zoe nodded. "I know it's risky, but if it works, we'll have a chance to face the senior demon directly. As a superior commander, its brain is worth the risk." In the past, this was indeed an irresistible temptation for the higher-ups, Agatha thought. But now was not the era of the Union. Neither His Majesty nor Tilly Wimbledon would force a witch to risk her life because of a possibility. Unless Camilla Derry was willing to do so. Just as she was hesitating, several explosions suddenly came from the other side of the battlefield. From here, she could see a large cloud of dust rising from the northern front line, as if it had been swept away by something. However, she did not hear any intense gunshots. Could it be that the senior demon still has a team of devil beasts? Or, the demons have broken through the defensive line? Agatha hurriedly activated the sigil of listening. "Sylvie, what's the situation at the front line?" "A monster we've never seen before is attacking us." Sylvie's anxious voice came from the sigil. "The front line needs support from the Longsong cannons." After the stone pillars exploded, the mortar shells also fell on the demon army, For the mad demons, who were covered in animal bones and leather, there was not much difference between a 152mm howitzer and a mortar. On the contrary, the latter, with its advantage in quantity and firing speed, caused more damage to the sprinting enemies. On the battlefield, where shrapnel was flying everywhere, the demons, who were charging forward without any cover, further increased the killing efficiency of the shells. It was normal for each explosion to set off a mist of blood. Faced with the continuous bombardment, the enemy's momentum was stopped. However, Sylvie was no longer in the mood to observe the results of the battle. Apart from monitoring the movements in the air, she could only see the 4 evil monsters in her field of vision. Unfortunately, the mortars were not so effective against the crawling monsters made of black stone and metal. If it was not a direct hit, it would be difficult for the shrapnel to penetrate its shell. At this moment, a black stone pillar grew out of the crawling monster's back again. Sylvie found that it was really a part of the monster's body. Whether it was the stone or the meridians and blood vessels, they were all peeled off from its body bit by bit, and then reassembled into a cylinder. She knew that she had to destroy these long-range enemies as soon as possible. The previous round of projectiles had caused a lot of damage to the First Army. As they were unprepared, more than 100 people were injured at the front line, and some soldiers were even shot in the shoulder and chest while they were in the trenches. More importantly, to suddenly suffer this kind of unheard-of attack without any countermeasures was undoubtedly a heavy blow to the morale of the troops. Fortunately, the enemy's growth process was much slower than the loading of the cannons. The artillery battalion is doing its best to restore the Longsong cannons. Agatha's calm tone made her feel more at ease. I'll ask the battalion commander to talk to you personally. Hello. Miss Sylvie. Then, a slightly reserved voice came to her. I'm Battalion Commander Vanner. It will take some time for the cannons to return to their pre-shooting state. But fortunately, after inspection, one of the cannons is not affected. If you can tell me the shooting parameters, I can arrange people to support it now. Sylvie could not help clenching her fists. She suppressed the excitement in her heart, glanced at the compass in front of her, and said the position word by word. 11 degrees 17 minutes north, 2,310 meters away. Please fire. Chapter 992. The number 6 Longsong cannon was one of the cannons that Vanner had patrolled before the attack. As it was located at the edge of the encampment, it had not suffered any other attacks except for 2 waves of spears. Compared to the cannons that had been knocked over by the devil beasts, the number 6 Longsong cannon only needed to be replenished before it could resume operation. In less than a minute after receiving the parameters, the Longsong cannon fired a furious flame at the target. The 2-kilometer distance caused the trajectory of the shell to be extremely low. Both the human soldiers and the demons on the battlefield could hear the special whistling sound of the bullet whizzing past them. However, the difference was that the latter was followed by an earth-shattering roar. The terrifying king of war had once again returned to its domain. At this distance, the accuracy of the large-caliber cannon was no longer erratic. The first shell accurately landed at the foot of a crawling monster. The violent explosion directly overturned half of its body. Its open shell was blown away, completely exposing its flesh and blood. He also killed a group of mad demons that were guarding the crawling monsters. Judging from their posture, they were obviously guarding against the witch's surprise attack. However, under the pressure of the mortars, they had no choice but to curl up beside the big spider, hoping to block the flying shrapnel with their stone limbs. However, in the face of the huge difference in caliber, this move became meaningless. The energy produced by the explosion was easily transmitted to the mad demons through the crawling monster. In the blink of an eye, the shockwave shattered the internal organs and bones of the mad demons, causing their seemingly stable bodies to ripple like water. When the dust fell to the ground, there were only corpses scattered around the center of the explosion. We hit it. Sylvie could not help waving her fist. The next target is 12 degrees 6 minutes. 2,480 meters away. No problem. The backup will be here soon. At the same time, the demons who had been suffering from the bombardment of the mortars finally entered the area 1 kilometer away from the encampment. Just when everyone thought that the battle was about to end, the enemy's attack came to an abrupt halt. The whole process lasted less than 10 minutes. The mad demons at the forefront were within 500 meters of the northbound slope, which was the first barbed wire fence. But that was all. Without the threat of the devil beasts, all the machine gun squads in the front line, including the anti-aircraft machine guns, aimed at the swarming enemies. For a time, the entire battlefield could be described as boiling. The firepower of the First Army could not be mentioned in the same breath as that of the battle at Coldwind Ridge. At that time, the limited number of heavy machine guns were carefully placed in the blockhouses, and were only allowed to be used against the most threatening targets. Now, the First Army could freely pour ammunition at any enemy that stepped into its firing range, even if this squandering could only last for one battle. Meanwhile, the 500-meter area became the hunting ground for the precision shooting team in the first trench. Normally, demons wouldn't care about obstacles like barbed wire. Their strong bodies were strong enough to leap over them or uproot wooden stakes. However, in the eyes of a sniper, such an action was no different from suicide. When the demons found that they could not get close enough to throw the spear, they could no longer control themselves. This had nothing to do with discipline and morale, but more like the instinctive despair of the beasts. After leaving nearly 1,000 corpses in front of the defensive line, they turned around and retreated like the tide. During this process, the machine guns kept firing until the barrels were roasted red. Compared to the fierce battle in the rear, the front line seemed to be more peaceful. Sylvie finally felt relieved. Perhaps only she knew how thrilling the trump card showdown 2 kilometers away was. When the magic vortexes of the last 2 crawling monsters were full and were about to be activated, the number 1 and number 3 longsong cannons made up for it in time. If they had been 1 or 2 seconds late, the stone pillars would have caused more damage to the First Army, who were engaged in the crossfire. But no matter what, this battle was won by humans. After 400 years of silence, humans had once again entered this forgotten land, and they had finally redeemed themselves from the hands of the demons. It was already 4 days later when Roland received the detailed report from the front line. Due to the large number of casualties, the First Army spent a lot of effort to clean up the battlefield. According to the experience of the tequila, the first thing to do was to burn the demons' corpses and take away all the magic stones. In particular, if they could not take away the magic stones from the enemy's corpses, it would not be a complete victory. If the demons took the magic stones back, they would soon appear on a new demon. The final statistics were very shocking. Almost 6,000 demons died in this ambush, which was more than the total number of the First Army who participated in the battle. Less than half of them were directly killed by the cannons and machine guns. Most of the demons died when the red mist was cut off, and they were scattered on the road. It was not that the enemies did not prepare well. After the post-war inventory, the First Army found more than 10 siege beasts that had been modified as transportation vehicles, not including the scraps that had been blown into pieces. If the humans were at a disadvantage, they could take their time to replenish the red mist, but the route made it impossible. Relying only on the red mist they carried, it was impossible to retreat from the outpost to the Tequila ruins. If I remember correctly, the witches can also use those siege beasts, right? Roland said to the sigil of listening. You're right. The core of this thing is the magic stone. With a little training it can be used. Zoe answered instead of Iron Axe. Although it's slow, it can carry a lot of things. The Union once used it to replace horses and mules for long-distance transportation. It seems good to give them to the Ministry of Construction, Roland thought. The construction team happened to lack a batch of transportation vehicles, and the slow speed in the city was actually an advantage. Unfortunately, the magic stone that they seized the most was not very useful. It needed to be combined with a magic life form to play its full role. It was regarded as a special magic stone of the demons, and was usually taken back to the rear for centralized destruction. By the way, how did the enemies escape from Sylvie's detection? Let me answer this question. Agatha cleared her throat. After the battle, we conducted a comprehensive search of the outpost, and found an underground passage. It was connected to a cave 2 kilometers away. There, We found an underground camp built by the demons. Not only was there a mist storage tower, but also a God's Stone of Punishment pillar. The overall scale was a bit larger than the outpost that served as a bait. In fact, that was the real stronghold of the demons. Roland could not help but frown. A God's Stone of Punishment that can cover an entire camp? Chapter 993. Of course it was unheard of. If the demons had possessed such an ability 400 years ago, the Witch Empire would have been annihilated within a year or two, let alone 10 years. After all, it was impossible to fight against an endless stream of enemies with only a small number of extraordinaires. Once every outpost had a God's Stone of Retaliation, the witches could only wait for death. Roland naturally knew how difficult it was to carve out such a God's Stone of Retaliation. The more complete a God's Stone of Retaliation was, the stronger it would be. Even a close-range shot from a flintlock would only leave a few white spots on the raw boulders at the bottom of the North Slope mine. The only way to mine them was to use blood of magic to slowly erode and peel them off before cutting and polishing them. Therefore, large God's Stones were very valuable. However, even the Guardian Stone in the Hermes Cathedral was not as large as this one. According to the Ice Witch's description, the demons seemed to have directly cut out a section of the raw stone with some kind of sharp weapon. Either the demons had mastered incredible processing techniques, or they had a deeper understanding of magic power. Either way, it was not good news for the human race. Based on the demons' new weapons, they haven't been idle in the past 400 years. Roland knocked on the table and said, "I'm afraid the third battle of Divine will be more difficult than expected." Compared to the demons in the era of the Union, the demons were not only more cunning, but also had made great progress in technology. Hybrid creatures like the crawling monsters were simply the best weapons to deal with ordinary combat witches. With a range of 2 kilometers, they could launch an attack when the witches were unprepared. By the time the witches realized what was going on, it would be too late for them to use their abilities. Even if they had an observer like Sylvie, as long as the demons attacked, the witch's defensive ability was limited to a range of 5 meters. How many of their teammates could they protect? As much as I don't want to admit it, the demons have indeed evolved faster than us. Zoe said. If this was a war in the era of the Union, I'm afraid we would have suffered a crushing defeat. Of course, Roland could imagine how few witches could escape from the ambush alive. Surrounded by senior demons in the sky, mad demons far outnumbered witches on the ground, and a new type of demon that could kill a large number of witches. The question now was, were these 5 crawling monsters the only trump cards of the demons, or a small part of the vanguard army? Did the demons develop other weapons of war other than the crawling monsters? What would they look like? How should they deal with them? This was information that Neverwinter urgently needed to know. After reporting the results of the battle, next was the casualties of the First Army. Regarding this part of the content, after the end of the battle, Roland already had a general idea, and after a lapse of 4 days, there was not much difference in the detailed statistics. There was no doubt that this was the credit of Nana and Lily. A total of more than 190 people in the First Army were injured, and 75 people were killed. Most of the casualties were caused by the crawling monsters. The stone needles shot into the trenches from above made it impossible for the soldiers to dodge, and after piercing through the bodies, they almost nailed the soldiers to the trenches. In order to send the wounded to the rescue camp, the emergency team had to first pull out the more than 1 meter long stone needles, which resulted in a lot of bleeding. Many vital parts were injured, and the incorrect rescue method caused many people to stop breathing within a few minutes. Of course, Roland would not blame the paramedics. In fact, the first appearance of the emergency team had already bought a lot of time for the wounded soldiers. Moreover, Nana's magic power was not enough to treat so many people at the same time, so they had to use the assembly line method to heal the fatal wounds. In this way, emergency treatment of minor injuries was particularly important. As the scale of the war continued to expand, Nana would only be able to take care of fewer and fewer wounded people. In the end, the First Army had to solve the problem of treatment by themselves. Bring back the ashes of the sacrificed soldiers, Roland said in a low voice. Greycastle won't forget them. Yes, Your Majesty, Iron Axe replied solemnly. So, what's your plan for the First Army's next action? The Pearl of the Northern Region asked. The enemy's loss obviously exceeded their expectations. According to Miss Lightning's observation, the patrolling devil beasts near the Tequila ruins have become much fewer. She didn't encounter any demons until she was 100 kilometers away from the ruins. In addition, Miss Sylvie has also confirmed this. Except for the tower-like iron monsters, the remaining magic light is less than 1,000. In other words, their foothold on the fertile plains is currently empty. Roland pondered for a long time and then made a decision. When the wounded have recovered, we'll break camp and return to Neverwinter. Are you worried that we can't keep up with the supplies? If we can't occupy the ruins, there's no point in continuing to march north. He took a sip of tea and said, And winter is coming. Although the months of demons were not based on the season, for the people around the barbarian land, the never-ending snow and overcast clouds were the real winter. At that time, the First Army not only had to face the extremely harsh environment, but also had to be on guard against the ubiquitous demonic beasts. In such a distant war, Neverwinter could not guarantee the supply of food and cold-resistant materials, nor could it provide enough ammunition for the army to fight a multifaceted war. Therefore, it was extremely risky to stay in the barbarian land for the winter. When the snow fell, it would not be so easy to retreat. I understand, Edith replied. The General Staff will work with the Commander-in-Chief to formulate an evacuation plan. When Roland was about to end this long-distance meeting, Agatha's voice suddenly interrupted him. Everything depends on safety. Your Majesty, there's one more thing I need you to know. Oh, go ahead. Well, the senior demon that was defeated by the God's punishment witches is still alive. After listening to Agatha, Roland could not help but be stunned. Will it work to have Camilla connect the demon's mind? It was not just consciousness. In a sense, it could even be shared and integrated as one. In other words, the subject could experience what it was like to be a demon when the mind resonated, which was not something new or interesting. The experience of the Tequila witches when they possessed the carrier could explain this problem. Non-human sensory information would confuse one's mind, and after familiarizing oneself with it, one would not be able to return to a normal state, not to mention the impact of the collision of two completely different minds. This made him think of the term spiritual pollution. Chapter 994. What is it? The other side paused for a moment before continuing. If it's risky for humans to accept the demon's perception, then we can turn the demons into humans. You mean transferring souls? Roland quickly thought of the key point. You once mentioned that there are demons in the dream world, which means that the heir of Starfall City has used the ability to extract souls from demons. This at least proves that they are also affected by the soul instrument. Zoe explained. After that, we just need to transfer the senior demon to Scourge's body, and all the risk of perception will be borne by this guy. I see. Roland could not help but nod. Using Scourge as a vessel was tantamount to forcing the demon to adapt to humans, and the sensory feedback received by the telepathic link was also familiar. In a situation where the other party was confused, it was easier to gain an advantage in a mental confrontation, which sounded like a good idea. But you will also lose a vessel that can be transferred. After the destruction of the church, the bodies of the God's punishment warriors were basically used up one by one. Compared to a cold, senseless cage, we are more willing to sleep in your dream world. So there's nothing wrong with this. Ahem. Roland almost choked on his tea. Although he knew that the other party was a woman, when he heard a deep male voice faintly say such words, the lethality was still too shocking. Just kidding, Zoe chuckled, which was rare for her. In fact, we have a few defective products in our collection, which can be used for this transfer. Moreover, compared to the possible harvest, the price of a body is not worth mentioning at all. Defective products? He cleared his throat and asked. From Hermes to our original hiding place, we have to cross the impassable mountain range, which is not an easy journey, especially during the months of demons. Some scourge even crawled there, because their feet had been bitten off by demonic beasts. A body like this naturally can't be used as a warrior, so we originally planned to use it as a vessel for immortality for the nobles to enjoy. Roland secretly twitched the corner of his mouth. Can such a life really be regarded as enjoyment? But even if it's a defective product, it should still have the same ability as the God's Stone of Retaliation, right? If I use it during the connection process, will it cause any problems? You don't have to worry about that. Even for us, it would take decades to master an unfamiliar body. Zoe replied, the time required to activate the divine punishment domain is even longer. Many people even have to wait until the second transfer to be able to use this ability. Even if the devil has an unimaginable talent in this field, it is unlikely that he can do this during the interrogation. Agatha added, at the very least, even if the resonance is interrupted, the pain is only temporary. Sylvie has personally verified this during her investigation. By the way, have you discussed this with Ms. Camilla? Roland suddenly thought of a key question. I've talked to her. At first, she was against it. After all, this is something she has never tried before. No, which can be said to be completely risk-free as an interrogator, but Zoe convinced her. Really? Roland asked doubtfully. Camilla was not an eloquent person. In fact, it's very simple, Your Majesty, Zoe continued. I just told her that the person who connected with the devil is none other than myself. Roland could not help but be slightly startled. I'm not only an extraordinary, but also the first awakened God's punishment witch. In this state, I'm more confident in dealing with the devil than most people, she said calmly. Of course, the most important thing is that I'm the one who proposed this plan. So of course I should bear all the risks. This is probably the reason why ancient witches are so arrogant, but it is impossible to hate them. Roland thought to himself, when it comes to dealing with the devil, they are indeed the first batch of people to shout, follow me. Just this point alone has already surpassed many people. I see. We'll do as you say, Roland replied after a moment of silence. After a moment of silence, he replied, remember to keep an eye on the senior demons on the way back. I'll take good care of it, Your Majesty, Zoe said with a smile. Perhaps compared to the final interrogation, the process of escorting the devil was what she was most looking forward to. After ending the call, Roland fell into deep thought for a while. Do humans and demons really have souls? If not, how can these tequila witches change their bodies at will? What is the principle of the soul instrument? If there is, why can't the soul exist independently of the body? After all, if the soul can be separated from the body at will, it is no different from being immortal. And the dream world? How does such a lifelike illusory space that does not exist in this world come into being? In the ancient books of the underground civilization, what is at the end of the light pillar that leads to the divine domain? After thinking about it, perhaps only after understanding the nature of magic power and the battle of divine will could this puzzle be solved. But no matter what, he now had a chance to witness the soul transfer with his own eyes. Compared to the worries he had during the expedition, the time on the way back seemed to be much faster. As the city hall was growing stronger day by day, there were very few government affairs that required Roland's personal attention. Therefore, he spent most of his free time on several key industrial projects. The flight test of the glider was still progressing steadily. The flight manual written by Tilly gradually grew from a few thin pages to a book as thick as intermediate chemistry. When adding the cover, Roland deliberately used gold as the title. Thunder was also getting more and more familiar with the steel ship. Although the power and control system were not satisfactory at the beginning, and there were many faults, it was finally like a real ship after several improvements. In addition, the Wizard Tower specially built for Agatha was also completed in the last month of autumn. From the moment this 5-story concrete building was completed, it became the new landmark of Neverwinter with its unique style and height exceeding that of the Lord's Castle. There was no doubt that before the completion of the Miracle Building, it would be the most eye-catching sight in the city. In addition, the Petroleum Fractionation Tower and the factory building for assembling the new generation of power were also nearing the end of construction. In the past, the closer it was to winter, the quieter the western region was, as if the cities and towns had fallen into hibernation together with the earth. However, since the establishment of Neverwinter, this phenomenon gradually changed and reached a new peak this year. From the North Slope mine to the shallow beach harbor, there were busy people and newly built houses everywhere. The prosperity and vitality of the streets and alleys amazed all the businessmen who came here. 1.5 months later, the First Army finally returned to their long-awaited starting point. The people of Neverwinter spontaneously lined up on the suburban grassland to welcome them. Their cheers were so loud that it almost pierced the sky. On that day, white snow floated down from the sky. Chapter 995. After bidding farewell to His Majesty, Zoe led the gods' punishment witches back to the third border city. After taking care of the dying senior demon, she was taken into a secret chamber deep in the ground by Al-Qaeda. Pasha and Celine were also waiting inside. Obviously, compared to capturing a living demon, they were more concerned about something else. What do you think? After closing the heavy stone door, Al-Qaeda eagerly landed in front of her. Can we win? Haven't we already won? Zoe spread out her hands. Al-Qaeda poked her forehead with her tentacle. You know what I'm asking, so stop teasing me. As the only extraordinary left in Tequila, she was undoubtedly closer to the senior witches than to the others. Although the surviving ancient witches began to follow the principle of every witch is equally important, after the Union was destroyed, the past social class still had some influence. Since she's so relaxed, I think it should be a good answer. Pasha chuckled. In fact, I'm not sure. Seeing Pasha speak, Zoe became more serious. I'm afraid that the demons today are very different from the enemies 400 years ago. Not only in the use of magic power, but also in the types of demons. She then described the entire battle in detail. It can be said that Lady Alice's idea was right, but according to her plan, the humans would inevitably fail. The actual battle proved that the gods' punishment witches were indeed the best weapons to suppress the senior demons. Unfortunately, it was difficult for them to compete with the enemy on the battlefield. A powerful anti-magic body did not mean that they would not be injured. In the face of the new war machine, the gods' punishment witches' biggest advantage would be gone. If they could not break through the enemy on the battlefield, the Queen of Starfall City's plan would be meaningless. After confirming this, Pasha seemed to be relieved as if she had put down a heavy burden. So we didn't choose the wrong follower. Lady Natalia's decision is correct. This is great. Yes, this is great. Celine also whispered. Her voice was even a little choked. For a person who had lived for more than 400 years, this was really an incredible thing. But at this moment, Zoe could empathize with him. When most of the leaders of the Union supported Alice, they resolutely stood by Queen Sunchesser because of their different ideals. At the critical moment when the Witch Empire was in turmoil, they completely tore up the foundation of the Union with an unfair raid. Even in death, Zoe remembered that one of the Blessed Army's comrades, who had been severely injured by her, leaned against her and said in a weak voice, "It's you who ruined everything." Ever since then, their hearts had been weighed down by a heavy boulder. There is nothing to fear from death. The scariest thing was to carry the confusion and disdain of his companions, and search for a slim hope in the darkness. If they failed, it would mean that they had killed the only possibility for the continuation of witches. That kind of sin was not something that could be offset by death. It was precisely because of this obsession that everyone endured the senseless emptiness and persevered. Now that Alice's plan had been proven to be a wrong direction, they naturally felt a long-lost relief. Even if the final outcome was still the annihilation of mankind, at least the fate of the survivors would not seem so sad. Even so, Lady Natalia only tied with the Queen of Starfall City. Urcha rubbed her long non-existent nose. We haven't won the final victory yet, it's too early to be happy. Don't worry, even if you cry, no one will see you in this state. Pasha. Zoe smiled and shook her head. I haven't finished yet. Although it's still uncertain who will win the battle of divine will, at least I see hope. With these words, the three senior witches quieted down. In the 400 years of searching in the darkness, hope was what they yearned for the most. No one knew if the chosen one really existed, but they had to search for it. This kind of aimless confusion lingered in their hearts all the time. The longer their lives, the more intense the torment. In the beginning, everyone would often discuss the ability of the chosen one, as well as her possible age and appearance, but when it came to the search for the chosen one under the guise of black money, no one dared to talk about this topic lightly, because they were afraid of fabricating an image and using it as a target. If they found someone who matched but found out that it was not the chosen one, no one could bear such disappointment. Because of this, hope had also become a luxury. But now they could say this word easily again. Realizing this, the ancient witches could not help but fall into a speechless melancholy. After a while, Pasha broke the silence. So, can we complete Lady Natalia's entrustment? Entrustment? Cha was stunned. Wait a minute. We haven't found the real chosen one yet. I'm fine with it, Zoe shrugged. In the ancient books of the underground civilization, there's no rule that the key holder must be male or female, right? After all, it's unknown whether they have a concept of gender or not. Natalia had left a will that if they could find the chosen one, everyone should follow her lead, destroy the demons, and revive Tequila. Although the five-colored stone showed that the chosen one was somewhat different from what they had imagined, and it could not activate the instrument of divine retribution, the effect was the same when it came to dealing with demons. I also think there's no problem. Celine was the last to speak. The ancient books also didn't stipulate that there can only be one chosen one. When we find a new chosen one, we can always change. Since you all agree. Okay then. Cha sighed helplessly. Whether there will be a new chosen one or not is another matter, but I think we can save the trouble of changing. Zoe looked at Pasha and said, the thing you once worried about is now showing signs. Did those witches reject you during the battle? It's not that obvious. It was not so obvious. She told him of Camilla's affair. When she heard that I was to be the interrogator, she consented to the request of the devil's mind. This also shows that her concern for witches being harmed does not include an undead monster like me. The atmosphere suddenly became a little heavy. As early as 100 years ago, Pasha had mentioned this possibility. Although they considered themselves witches, the new generation of witches might not necessarily think so. Whether in appearance, characteristics, or ability, there was no similarity between the two. Not to mention witches, they could not even be regarded as human beings. Roland Wimbledon, who could accept them so quickly, was more like an anomaly. When the history of the Union gradually faded from people's memory, the new awakened might no longer regard them as witches. More extreme. In order to explore the mystery of magic power and the technology of the underground civilization, the witches might use them as experimental subjects. Although this idea was a little pessimistic, it was not impossible to magnify the scale of hundreds or even thousands of years. Hearing Zoe's self-mockery, Pasha sighed. I see, but I won't regret it. The three of them did not respond, because this was also the path they had chosen. If we can fulfill the wishes of the three chiefs, our mission will be over. She paused. What the world will be like in the future is not something we can control. But at least now we can prepare for a rainy day and find a way out for ourselves. Live in seclusion in the mountains, disappear, or find a place to bury ourselves. Cha said unhappily. Chapter 996. You mean the gods' punishment witches? I'm afraid that the mortal king doesn't think so. Power is not only reflected in military force. Pasha pointed at Zoe. The key to the change in the human kingdom is irreplaceable, and that's where our advantage lies. So that's how it is. Celine suddenly understood. Compared to combat ability, this is indeed much more important. Zoe put her hand on her forehead. I'll pass. Let's leave this important task to Faldi and the others. Hey, what are you talking about? Althea said discontentedly. Why can't I understand anything at all? Pasha is talking about knowledge. The youngest extraordinary twitched her mouth. Isn't there an academy, a library, and private scholars in His Majesty's dream world? Since everything in the dream world comes from his memory, Everyone should be able to learn. Compared to selective copying, it's obviously more effective to absorb comprehensively. As long as we can spare some time for entertainment and start from the most basic knowledge, His Majesty will have a group of helpers who can completely understand his intentions after 10 years of hard work. The energy of mortals will gradually decline as their bodies age, but we don't have to worry about this. 100 years is enough for the gods' punishment witches to become the inheritors of His Majesty's consciousness. This is our biggest advantage. Pasha added, especially after he passed away, only we know what the world is like in that world. If they want to continue on the path His Majesty has opened, they have to go through us. In this way, even if we don't be witches, we won't be affected too much. In a sense, unfavorable to us is a futile attempt to overthrow His Majesty's will. The Witch Union will not sit back and do nothing. On the other hand, we only control knowledge, which is good for any faction. Even if we don't have military force, we will still become a force that can lift heavy loads easily. Isn't this what the Cloud School does? Auka muttered. According to legend, when most humans were still ignorant, some sages gathered together and spread the seeds of civilization. They taught people how to make iron, weave and cut clothes, and farm animals until humans spread all over the land of dawn. Hundreds of years later, their prestige was like the sun in the sky, and all those in power did not hesitate to use all kinds of means to rope them in, turning many members from the disseminators of knowledge into the private property of power. After the leaders of the past became aware of this, they moved the organization out of the major cities and stipulated that they were not to easily get involved in politics. They were to only focus on researching the mysteries of the world and solving the mysteries of the ancient ruins. Since the new base was located at the peak of a tall mountain, it was covered by clouds and mist all year round, so people called it the Cloud School. Even though these people rarely interacted with the rest of the world, their status was still extraordinary. Regardless of the succession of monarchs, they were always respectful to the Cloud sect. Every year, they would send out large amounts of resources and young disciples just to receive pointers from their predecessors. However, the good times did not last long. Demons soon entered the human world, and the first battle of divine will broke out. It was also at that time that a disturbing rumor gradually spread. It was said that it was a sage from hundreds of years ago who had introduced these brutal and terrifying beasts to the land of dawn. As a result, the Cloud School's reputation plummeted. Without any suzerains willing to lend a helping hand, it was devoured by the devils and became a dusty corner of history. At least we won't collude with the demons, Celine said disapprovingly. And the title of Manager of Knowledge is not bad, much better than the titles of the Quest Society. All in all, this is just a preliminary direction. After all future plans will only be meaningful after we defeat the demons. Pasha smiled and patted Celine's head. Well, let's go adjust the soul instrument. When the celebration outside is over, we should be ready here. I don't think His Majesty has the patience to wait until tomorrow. When the people in the city were still celebrating the victory, Roland had already entered the third border city with the main members of the United Front. He really couldn't wait. If the Devil City in the memory fragment was an old scene from hundreds of years ago, then the information stored in the brain of this senior demon was the latest information about the enemy. Since normal intelligence channels were ineffective against the alien races, this opportunity was extremely important. However, as soon as he stepped into the core hall area, he noticed a trace of strangeness. He saw the tequila witches standing in a neat line in the center of the hall, and the leaders were the 3 senior witches who had incarnated as original carriers. Then the gods' punishment witches raised their elbows, crossed their fingers in front of their chests, and bowed to him. This was not the first time he had seen such a strange salute, but it should be the special salute of the inferior witches to the superior. However, before he could ask, the 3 carriers also crossed their tentacles in front of their bodies and dropped to the ground. Among them, Pasha's voice also sounded in his mind. Thank you, Your Majesty. The tequila will always be loyal to you. This surprised Roland. The first sentence of gratitude was understandable, probably because they saw the hope of defeating the demons and taking revenge, but the wording of the second sentence was obviously a little strange. Although the United Front also required all members of the Union to serve the leader, the other party's respectful attitude told him that the two were not the same thing. He suddenly remembered that the senior witches themselves were the upper class of the Union, and the only people they needed to salute to were the three transcendents. Do they think I'm one of the three chiefs of the Union? Although he did not know why the other party's attitude had changed, he had been in power for so long that he knew it was not the time to get to the bottom of it. No matter how slow he was about politics. Roland coughed twice, regarded it as an ordinary salute, and nodded. No need to do this. This victory belongs to everyone present. By the way, how are the preparations for the soul transfer? We can start at any time. Pasha pointed to a magic core behind her that was emitting a purple light. Please follow me. Following her to the bottom of the core, Roland noticed that there were two stone beds next to them. On the bed on the left lay a male god's punishment warrior, who had lost both his feet. His hair was already gray, and it was obvious that he had been transformed for a long time. On the right lay a body that did not look like a human at all. Not only were its limbs incomplete, but even its black armor was full of dents. It was hard to imagine that it was still alive under such circumstances. Generally speaking, it can't survive until now. Zoe seemed to have seen through his doubts and took the initiative to explain. If it wasn't for Miss Nana's treatment, it would have died on the same day. In addition, Lady Agatha also helped a lot. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to preserve the seized red mist for so long. However, in order to prevent the senior demon from reviving on the way, we have to make a series of adjustments. That's why it looks like this now. Adjustments? Vendi was puzzled. How do you do it? It's very simple. When you feel that it has recovered, you stab it and try to make it consume as much magic power as possible to heal itself. It's just that it's my first time doing this kind of work, so there were a few times when it almost died, Zoe said with a look of longing. Sure enough, this was what she had been looking forward to the most. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little stiff, Roland cleared his throat and said, "So hurry up. Start the transfer now." Chapter 997. The spindle-shaped skeleton of the magic core suddenly expanded, and a purple light flowed on it, dyeing the ground of the hall with a cold color. Then the giant 2-meter-high structure slowly rotated, and with the flickering fluorescent light, it was as gorgeous as the neon lanterns in the future. However, the skeleton that expanded in the air told Roland that magic power was indeed beyond the scope of physics, to some extent. Although there was no fulcrum, they could not separate, as if there was a pair of invisible hands pulling them. How did the underground civilization make these things? Roland looked at Pasha. If you were given the corresponding materials, could you replicate them? I'm afraid not, Your Majesty. Pasha shook her head. Although I don't want to admit it, this race's research on magic power is far more advanced than that of the Union. Celine is the leader of the Quest Society, but she only learned how to operate them after hundreds of years. The lack of manpower is also the main problem. Celine turned around. Analyzing its structure is not as simple as instilling magic power. We have to feel thousands of contact points at the same time to get a general picture of it, which is impossible for ordinary people to do with their skin. In other words, if you want to understand it, you have to become what you are now. Tilly asked. Yes, just like a summer bug doesn't know the coldness of winter, and a deaf person can't hear the sound of all things, Celine said helplessly. I can't even describe what I've learned and felt in human language, because there is no such expression in the existing vocabulary. So now, only Pasha and I can control the magic core. Wait. Do you mean that the main tentacle on the original carrier is actually very sensitive? Roland asked in surprise. Not only the main tentacle, but every tentacle is sensitive, Celine said matter-of-factly. They can distinguish hot and cold, smell dry and wet. And the most subtle touch. The main tentacle can even directly feel the flow of magic power. So once it is transferred to the carrier, it can no longer adapt to its previous body. Why are you interested in it? No, I'm just casually asking. Roland couldn't help but look away. At this critical moment, it was better not to think about such trivial things. No matter how sensitive the main tentacle was, It was still a powerful weapon for the original carrier. He remembered Phyllis once said that the carrier was as powerful as a god's punishment witch. But from this, it could be seen that there was an almost insurmountable barrier for an ordinary person to study magic power. If one could not even perceive it, how could one study it? Before obtaining reliable means of observation, this was destined to be a subject that belonged to only a few people. Core number 3 has been adjusted to soul instrument mode. Transfer is about to begin, Celine's voice interrupted his thoughts. Following this reminder, Pasha and Alka inserted their main tentacles into the spindle. Roland widened his eyes, afraid that he would miss a single detail. But in fact, there was nothing strange about this process. 2 beams of light bloomed from the core and covered the 2 stone beds below. At the same time, the magic power that filled the skeleton quickly surged. After a quarter of an hour, Celine let out a long sigh. Good luck. This guy can indeed be captured by the soul instrument. Now we just need to wait for it to attach to Scourge. That's it. He blinked and asked. In fact, soul transfer is a process of exchanging keys, Pasha explained. If you observe through the 5-colored stone, you will see that the light beam that originally belonged to the demons has been drawn to the god's punishment army. Before the ancient witch's voice died away, Scourge, who had been motionless, suddenly opened his eyes. The facial features on his face were scrunched up, making him look particularly ferocious. Not only was there a strange sound coming from his throat, but his body was also constantly trembling. His fingers were bent like dead wood in several directions. This strange scene made the surrounding witches involuntarily take a step back. This is what happens when we are suddenly stuffed into a strange body, Zoe said. After our first transformation, we don't look much better. Without help, we can't even eat. Roland could not help but think of a group of exiled witches rolling around in a cold underground cave. To be able to clench their teeth and persist for more than 10 years, they must be strong-willed people in every aspect. This is also the time when the demon's mind is the most chaotic, so I'll leave the rest to Ms. Camilla. She looked at the crowd. If you want to know anything, just ask. If there is an answer, I will repeat its thoughts. Zoe paused. Besides, I have a request. Go ahead. Roland nodded. No matter what happens, as long as I don't give the signal to stop, don't stop the mind resonance, she said word by word. Everything depends on the interrogation. This. The expression on Camilla Derry's face finally changed. I understand. Roland did not hesitate and quickly agreed. Camilla had already made up her mind, so it was unnecessary to worry about her now. It was equivalent to underestimating her determination. In that case, I'm going to use my ability. The chief butler of Sleeping Island looked at him deeply, then raised his hands and placed them on the shoulders of Zoe and Scourge. Zoe's face suddenly showed a painful expression. Then, as if she could not bear it, she opened her mouth and roared. But in an instant, Roland knew that it was the demon who roared. The connected minds made the demon roar through her mouth. What did you do to me? Her voice was a little distorted. Lowly reptile, let me go. Otherwise, I will teach this female a lesson. The witches could not help but gasp. Is Zoe? This is just a threat, Anna said calmly. Look at her finger. At this moment, everyone noticed that the god's punishment witch's right hand was holding up a finger and was waving it back and forth casually. Apparently, she was not being controlled. Roland also guessed what the demon was thinking. Obviously, this way of communication was more direct than asking and answering, leaving less time for the demon to think and resist. Lowly reptile? He sneered. Then what about you, who lost to us? I lost. The demon was stunned. Her voice suddenly became low, and a painful expression appeared on her face again. However, Roland could not tell whether the pain came from the demon's chaotic thoughts or from Zoe herself. Yes, you were almost beaten into a sieve, and your army was completely wiped out. Half of them died on the spot, and the other half didn't make it back to Tequila alive. But now was not the time to relax. He took advantage of the situation and said, We also filled up the underground camp and burned thousands of demons to ashes. So tell me, who is the lowly one? By the last sentence, his tone had become a question. No, this is impossible. Unless. Zoe's head swayed from side to side. After a while, she raised her head and murmured in a tone of astonishment. Did you also grab a legacy shard and upgrade your race? Those weapons were also made according to the contents of the shard? Chapter 998. For a moment he wanted to say, "Are you also a member of Tatalin? Sorry for my disrespect." But he managed to hold himself back. After all, they were still in the interrogation stage, and he did not want to offend them. What's more, in the state of spiritual resonance, the link would translate each other's thoughts into a language that they could understand. If there was a lack of corresponding words, they would choose to replace it with words that were as similar as possible. Therefore, even common sentences might not necessarily express the same meaning. However, the demon did not answer his question. Instead, it fell into a dilemma. No, it doesn't make sense. You bugs have never entered the Sky-Sea realm. How could you obtain the inheritance shard? That's not a realm you can enter. But if that's not the case, why did we fail? Lies, they're all lies. Cabradabi will never admit it. Before the interrogation, Roland knew that demons were at their weakest during the early stage of transformation. According to Zoe, demons would feel extremely uncomfortable after their souls were extracted by the magic core, which made them unable to control their emotions and leak information that they normally would not. Therefore, Roland pressed on. Do you need me to remind you further? You wanted to ambush my army, but you were forced to show up. You suffered heavy casualties before you even got close to the battlefield. You and your subordinates tried to save the situation, but you were attacked by the gods' punishment witches as soon as you landed. You didn't even have time to yawn. Now the person who defeated you is right in front of you. If you think about it carefully, you can see yourself in her eyes. The senior demon's expression turned extremely ugly. Apparently, after hearing his words, Zoe had already visualized the battle scene in her mind. Even if you don't admit it, you can't change the fact that you lost. You said it's impossible, but it's just a joke, Roland said sarcastically. I can't obtain the inheritance shard if I don't enter the Sky-Sea realm? Why don't you tell me what it is first? If you don't define it, how can I answer your doubts? Maybe in our eyes it's not that precious. You must be kidding me, Bug. Cabradabi's voice was full of anger. The source of the battle of divine will is the key to the continuation and promotion of our species. How can you say it's not precious? Pasha suddenly thought of something. Wait, is it like a red crystal with a sharp cone shape? If I touch it, I will be taken to an extremely spacious hall and see some incredible scenes? Is it like a red crystal with a sharp cone shape? A relic of the gods, Tilly exclaimed in a low voice. You call it a relic of the gods? You really are a lowly reptile, the demon said disdainfully. That is the inherent inheritance of the race, and has nothing to do with God at all. If you swallow it, your race will be promoted. If you lose it, your race will become the nourishment of another race. Now do you know where your stupidity lies? When the underground cowards were destroyed, you crawlers were still hiding on the surface. How could you have gotten this reward? Roland's heart skipped a beat. It turned out that this was the reason why the demon was so sure that humans could not get the fragment or relic. There were a total of 4 civilizations shown in the scroll. Since the relics could only be obtained by destroying one of them, it was indeed impossible for the humans to obtain them. The underground civilization had disappeared during the first battle of divine will. At that time, the humans were busy fighting against the demons. How could they have the energy to participate in another war of extermination? He looked around and found that everyone's expression was particularly serious. Obviously, they all realized the importance of this information. First of all, it indirectly confirmed the speculation of the tequila witches. Did they kill each other for hundreds of years just because of a stone of unknown use? The will of divine will is so ruthless. Roland remembered that Vendi had once said this. But now it seemed that the relic not only determined the survival of the civilization, but also had immeasurable value to other competitors. This meant that there was almost no possibility of reconciliation in the battle of divine will. Secondly, from what the senior demons had said, they were undoubtedly one of the beneficiaries of the upgrade. Although Roland did not know the specific process of devouring the relic, he could attribute the evolution and new weapons to the relic. This made him think of the inheritance of knowledge. Could it be that the appearance of the mutated demons and giant skeletons in the Land of Dawn was related to the underground civilization? This was even more ridiculous than the Industrial Revolution. If the former required a large number of industrial workers and the accumulation of production materials, and only after a technological breakthrough would rapid productivity progress be triggered, then this kind of inheritance was no different from the martial arts novels. As long as one obtained the relic of a civilization, they could plunder all the accumulation of the defeated civilization. If this was the truth behind the upgrade, it was a little too terrifying. Finally, as a competitor in the picture, humans were indeed far inferior to other races. Take this piece of information as an example. Although it was of great significance, it was not classified at all. Even if they knew the weight of the relic, it would not affect the outcome of the war. If they could not defeat it, they could not defeat it. It was information that did not matter to anyone. However, it was precisely because of this that the human race only had a vague outline. Over the past 1,000 years, they had not been able to completely unite, which led to repeated defeats. Now that he thought about it, he could only say that humans had wasted too much time on internal strife. Roland licked his dry lips and scanned through all the new questions in his mind. Finally, he chose the most important one. Is this all arranged by God? Is that why you call the war the battle of divine will? Is that how you know about the divine will? Probably because the senior demon had been silent for too long. When he spoke again, his voice was much calmer. Well, it's not a bad idea to let you die knowing. Listen up, insects. This war has nothing to do with God. It's only about the race. The final one who is upgraded will open the way to the origin of magic and obtain the omnipotent power. In front of that power, my will is the will of God. Of course, all of this has nothing to do with you lowly reptiles. You're doomed to die. Where did you learn all this? Why? Do you think I, Caberdabi, will continue to talk? The demon sneered. What do you mean? Roland suddenly felt that something was wrong. Zoe, I'm afraid this female can't hear you for the time being. You used the trick of transferring souls to confuse me, and then used the mind-reading ability to peep into my mind? You really haven't made any progress in the past hundreds of years. Somehow, Zoe's voice had become cold and ruthless. Playing tricks with magic power in front of me is suicidal. Although I can't control this body, it doesn't mean that I can't use magic power. Camilla. Roland suddenly shouted at the chief butler of Sleeping Island. It's too late. Say goodbye to this female. Chapter 999. What? Everyone gasped and looked at Zoe at the same time. Camilla was connected to two souls. Since one of them had disappeared and the demon was unlikely to just talk, there was only one possibility left. Althea's reaction was faster. When the chief steward screamed, she had already taken action. The main tentacle, which was powerful enough to crush a devil beast's torso, swept towards Zoe and pressed her to the ground. The force of the tentacle could be seen from the broken slate on her back. Obviously, Zoe did not hold back at all. Zoe spat out a mouthful of blood. Then the hall fell into a strange silence. There was no doubt that Hercha was doing this to prevent the demons from occupying Zoe's body and launching an attack. The mind resonance made up for the lack of perceptual control. Once the god's punishment witches activated the anti-magic area, even a small gap could cause great damage. Most of the witches present were not prepared to treat Zoe as an enemy. Althea, who was once the commander of the Blessed Army, had much more battle experience than the others. However, Zoe did not make a last struggle or fight to the death as they had imagined. From the moment the demon made its announcement to the moment she was pressed down by the main tentacle, she was as still as a puppet and showed no signs of being controlled. Did the demon's soul really transfer to this body? After a while, Roland broke the silence. I've never encountered such a situation before. Camilla still had lingering fear. Although the spiritual resonance can be understood as a bridge, it's just another form of communication. How is it possible to abandon the existing body and directly invade the heart of the person who is connected to it? Is there any way to confirm it? Tilly frowned. Unless it opens its mouth. Althea loosened the main tentacle, but still kept it confined. But the possibility is not small. The soul can't exist without the carrier, otherwise we wouldn't be so dependent on the underground civilization. It's not impossible for the demon to destroy its own consciousness, but even if it did, it wouldn't do it any good. So we have to prepare for the worst. I may have a way. Roland thought for a moment. If we bring Zoe's light beam into the dream world. I don't agree. Vendi immediately stopped him. For you, any risk should be avoided. That's right. What if the demon takes over your body? Nightingale echoed. It's not a loser in the soul battlefield, but a real senior demon. The risk is not uncontrollable, Roland slowly thought. If it can really enter the dream world, it must appear in a fixed location. As long as we arrange a team of God's punishment witches to enter the dream, we can definitely destroy it before it can react. Moreover, the dream world was completely different from the spiritual resonance. No matter what happened in the dream world, it would not affect reality. As long as one woke up, the time in the dream world would freeze, and any outsiders who did not belong to it would be forcefully expelled. Therefore, even if the worst-case scenario is that Zoe disappears and the demon takes her place, we can still confirm it. But Nightingale bit her lip and turned to look at Anna. You should also persuade him. I don't object to him doing this, Anna said unexpectedly. Why? Vendi and the others could not help but be stunned. Because he saved me, Pasha replied seriously. If someone had tried to dissuade him because of a similar reason, I'm afraid I would have died on the scaffold. Now that I'm the one who dissuades him, I can't convince myself. Besides, I believe in Roland's judgment. He must know that he is no longer alone. As they spoke, they looked at each other and smiled. Their expressions were full of tacit understanding and trust. Althea was silent for a long time. No matter what the result is, I will thank you on behalf of Zoe. And I want to hear it from her. Roland nodded. I'll arrange for the most capable companions to come here right away, Pasha said gratefully. Also, before entering the dream world, continue to maintain the state of mind resonance, Roland said casually. Didn't Zoe say that as long as she doesn't ask you to stop, don't interrupt the state of mind resonance? If it's a contest of consciousness, it's hard to say who will lose. Hey, female, guess what your insect companions are going to do now? Zoe looked up at the senior demon, and then turned her attention back to her body. Her chest was slightly bulging. Although it was almost non-bulging, it was still much more pleasing to the eye than the rough male body. His hands and feet were intact, and he could feel them clearly. However, his long uncut hair covered his forehead, just like in the dream world. Ha! They will definitely surround you as if they are facing a formidable enemy. The demon who called itself Caberdabi sneered. The demon named Caberdabi sneered. When you figure out what's going on, there's a 30% chance that you'll be imprisoned and tied to an iron bed like a lowly worm, soaking in excrement all day long. Of course, there is a 70% chance that you will be executed directly. After all, you have been cutting your own flesh to prevent losses for 400 years. Zoe looked around. It was pitch black, and there was nothing there. But it was not pure darkness. If there was no light, she would not be able to see herself. But in her field of vision, she could see both herself and the demon clearly. Hey, are you scared out of your wits? Or do you think you can escape by remaining silent? Caberdabi's voice became a little agitated. My patience is limited. You'd better understand your situation. We won't really die here. If you try your best to please me, I may spare you a lot of suffering. I thought demons wouldn't talk so much. Zoe tore a piece of cloth from her sleeve and tied up her long hair. If I were you, even if I learned the insect language, I wouldn't chatter in front of the insects all day long. It doesn't matter if you are stubborn. Soon you will only be able to scream. The demon sneered. I can feel the power in your soul, which is more vigorous than most insects. It's a good choice to use you as my last opponent. Then what? After I'm executed, how good will you be? Could it be that you did all of this just to vent your anger on me? What's wrong with that? Fight, kill, torture, promote. Insects, this is the attitude of a superior species. Do you want me to kneel on the ground and beg for your forgiveness? Kaburdabi roared. Death is nothing to be afraid of. Our souls will be taken in by the origin of magic. When the race reaches the top, we will return to the world again. Then you'd better hurry up, Zoe said with a poker face. Maybe they will kill you soon. That you're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.